The one obvious question that stalks anyone who has paid any attention whatsoever to the reporting and the dispatches from service members from the nation's longest war in history in Afghanistan is, what is our mission? What are we doing there? No one can ever seem to answer it, and yet the war continues.
We go into Afghanistan, we're fighting, tremendous mountains and ridges. We're fighting on one side, and you know who's got their excavators on the other side? China, taking out all the minerals. Afghanistan, nobody knew this. Afghanistan is rich with minerals, not oil, but minerals.
Lithium, everything.
And China is taking out all the minerals. And here we are fighting. We have trillions, we have like $1 trillion in Afghanistan, and we get nothing out of it. And we're going to end up leaving and keeping a couple of thousand soldiers there and this and that.
Well, now, thanks to documents pried from inside the federal government by the Washington Post, we know the U.S. government, across multiple administrations, officials deliberately misled the public about what exactly was going on. The papers include thousands of pages of documents created by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Here's how one 3-star Army general who served in both the Bush and Obama administrations described the mission, quote, "We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We did not know what we were doing. What are we trying to do here? We did not have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking."
Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld said that 9/11 created the kind of opportunities that World War II offered to refashion the world. It created in particular the opportunity to attack Afghanistan and Iraq.
The war in Iraq has been a disaster. It started the chain of events that leads now to the migration, maybe the destruction of Europe. Now, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, but the truth is that we started the war in Iraq. We spent $2 trillion on that war. We lost thousands of lives.
We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. They lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
We are going to drain the swamp.
Look what's happened over the last 10 years. Look what's happened over the years. I mean, it's been catastrophic. They've made such bad decisions. I mean, you look at Iraq.
I cannot sit idly by and watch career politicians like Joe Biden continue bleeding this country dry. And that's what it is. Take a look at his brother. His brother all of a sudden is building a big housing development in Iraq.
And what did we gain as a result of our invasion of Iraq, and how much damage did we incur? We gained nothing from the war, and actually we did horrific damage.
It's a total powder keg. If we would have never touched it, it would have been a lot better. I mean, we would have been much better off, on top of which we spent probably $4 trillion.
Most of the dollars went to waste and fraud, thanks to all of the companies that are part of the military-industrial complex.
George Bush actually started his first oil company way back in 1976 with a member of the bin Laden family.
Salem bin Laden, Osama's half-brother, co-founded Arbusto Energy with George W. Bush. On the morning of 9/11, Osama bin Laden's half-brother, Shafiq bin Laden, was the guest of honor at a meeting of the Carlyle Group in Washington, which George H.W. Bush was also addressing.
And Bush, another great Republican. He got us into the Middle East. That was we spent $7 trillion in the Middle East over a 17-year period. $7 trillion as of 3 months ago. Okay? You know what they did? That was like taking a big stone and throwing it into a hornet's nest.
So what happened in effect is the whole Bush family, the entourage, created this war machinery without the consensus of our military, without the agreement of our intelligence community, without the support of the American people. That was an act of treason.
We've been in the Middle East for 15 years, and we haven't won anything. We've spent $5 trillion in the Middle East because of thinking like that. They lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
Top administration officials made a total of 935 false public statements in an orchestrated attempt to take this nation to war.
We went after Iraq. They did not knock down the World Trade Center, okay? It wasn't the Iraqis that knocked down the World Trade Center.
There are sealed documents right now that nobody wants to allow to be open that talk very much about the subject. I'd like to see what it says.
Classified by the Bush administration.
Newly declassified information from a U.S. report on the 9/11 attacks have revealed links between al-Qaeda operatives and former Saudi ambassador to the U.S. Prince Bandar bin Sultan.
Bandar's relationship with another Saudi national, Osama Basnan, has also raised the possibility of an indirect link between the prince and the 9/11 incidents.
Here is the New York Post, how U.S. covered up Saudi role in 9/11. And when you cover up a role, you're now complicit. And they covered it up day one, ordering a NORAD stand down.
When you had the World Trade Center go, people were put into planes that were friends, family, girlfriends, and they were put into planes and they were sent back for the most part to Saudi Arabia.
World Trade Center came down during George W. Bush's presidency.
Right.
Are you blaming him?
When Jeb gets up and says, we were safe under his brother, we weren't safe. Could he have done something about it? His CIA knew about things happening.
The August 6 PDB warned against possible attacks in this country. And I ask you whether you recall the title of that PDB.
I believe the title was Bin Laden Determined to Attack Inside the United States.
Donald Trump accused President Bush and his team of purposely lying the country into war in Iraq, saying, I will tell you they lied.
He sounds like a liberal Democrat to me, Brett. He's wrong.
Trump has stood consistently and alone against the establishment for decades. Neocons and those who want to provoke wars for profit for the military-industrial complex are his biggest critics.
He clearly doesn't understand or has not spent any time learning about the facts of that period.
I only tell the truth, lobbyists. We've spent $5 trillion all over the middle. We have to rebuild our country. We have to rebuild our infrastructure.
You will find out who really knocked down the World Trade Center, because they have papers in there that are very secret. You may find it's the Saudis, okay? But you will find out.
I've never seen him involved in any way that would lead me to believe that he had any firsthand or practical experience about it.
The World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation, and it withstood that.
Now, there is some evidence that the FBI may have known of the plot in advance through an informant and might even have stopped the bombing that killed 6 people.
They discussed secretly substituting harmless powder for the explosives, but they didn't, according to the FBI's own informant, Imad Salem.
Our superiors wanted him to wear wire, and unfortunately they got into an issue.
He said, and I quote him, "You son of a bitch, coming from the Middle East, dragging sand in your shoes all the way up to here to tell me how to run my FBI and how to do my job?" I told him, "Sir, I am doing your job. None of your agents could have went undercover that deep. I'm doing it. You're not." And that even provoked him more, and he said, "Get out of here." I walked out of his office. I said, "Guys, when this bomb been built and goes off, don't come knock on my door." And that was it, and I walked away.
When I heard Imad was gone, I said, I can't believe it.
I said, "This is insane." Sayed Nusayr called me from Attica prison. "Brother, don't be afraid. Brother, you gotta come finish cooking." And of course, I'm not a cook. What I was cooking is about to build a bomb.
We was start already building the bomb, which is went off in the World Trade Center. It was built by supervision from the Bureau and the DA, and we was all informed about it, and we know that the bomb start to be built. By who? By your confidential informant. What a wonderful, great case.
Veteran prosecutor Mary Jo White takes over the reins of the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. She discovers, to her shock, that the FBI had informant Imad Salem deep inside the plot and let him go.
I made it very clear to my prosecutors and to the FBI that he needed to get put back in.
The supervisor said, "Oh, he's going to want a lot of money." He didn't want to pay him. I called Imad, and he was like, "You see, I told you."
"Remember what I told you, John?" And he said, yes, but I think we need you to come back.
Unbeknownst to the FBI at the time, Salem recorded many of his conversations with his handlers. In one, Salem complains to an FBI agent, "Since the bomb went off, I feel terrible. I feel bad. I feel here is people who don't listen."
And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building. You had the steel on the outside. When I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. I said, how could a plane, even a plane, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall.
I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it.
Boom! An explosion so hard that pushes upwards. Upwards.
Jack, what can you tell us happened first in New York?
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time two planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet.
Building 7 was a very special problem.
A truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River.
Law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van.
That day, there was an explosion on the basement, and this is prior to the building got hit by the plane, and then the plane hit.
It just seemed to me that to do that kind of destruction is even more than a big plane.
I lost hundreds of friends. The World Trade Center came down during the rain. He kept us safe. That's not safe.
As soon as we were hit by 9/11, I know a little bit about it. I was in the White House bunker all that day and helping coordinate and manage our response to 9/11. I didn't see Donald Trump there.
Well, I was down there right after the event, and I brought a big crew of people down.
Well, I just went to what they call Ground Zero. I've never seen anything like it. The devastation, the human life that's been just wasted.
I have hundreds of men inside working right now, and we're bringing down another 125 in a little while.
We have to save as many lives as possible.
There probably are some more people in there, and therefore you can't give up hope.
This is also an individual who has a grasp of the global conditions in which we are facing.
Trump insists soft immigration policy, poor intelligence coordination, and lack of awareness made America vulnerable. Trump has some interesting history on the issue of terrorism and warnings. In one of his books, published in 2000, Trump warned America was ignoring the threat of terrorism, said a massive attack on our shores was inevitable, Scott, in part because, quote, plenty of people would stand in line for a crack at a suicide mission within America.
I'm about security. I'm about safety. I want to have our country be safe again.
We need a toughness, we need strength, we need intelligence, and we need tough.
The World Trade Center came down during the, reign of George Bush, right? I mean, it came down. That was the greatest attack in the history of the United States.
It's what you do after that matters, and that's the sign of leadership. It's not does anybody actually blame my brother for the attacks on 9/11?
His brother gets hit on. He's a loyal person. He's loyal to his brother. But his brother made some mistakes. His brother could have made a mistake with respect to the actual hit because they did know it was coming. And George Tenet, the head of the CIA, told them that it was coming. So they did have advance notice, and they didn't really work on it. You have to get your three main agencies to talk to each other. Yeah. They had a lot of information that if it could have been correlated, it would have been very, very helpful. Yeah. As President Truman said, the buck stops here.
On March 5th, the CIA learns that Hazmi had actually entered the United States on January 15th, 7 days after leaving the Al-Qaeda meeting in Malaysia.
What I was told by CIA at the time was that they were now going to try, for the first time, to get sources on the inside.
So now the CIA knows Hazmi is in the United States, but the CIA still doesn't put Hazmi or Mihdhar on the watch list, and still does not notify the FBI about a very critical fact. A known Al-Qaeda operative, we're at war with Al-Qaeda, a known Al-Qaeda operative got into the United States.
Nobody read that information on the cable.
Should it have been read?
Yes, of course, in hindsight.
And should it have been read at the time?
Of course it should have been read.
All right, my question is, do you know who should have read it?
I don't know that, sir. But I can find that.
Was somebody responsible to have read it?
Well, a group of people, somebody should have read it.
Tom Wilshire, as well as Desk Officer Michelle, accessed the cable, mentioning the UBL associates coming to the United States, the March cable.
These two guys show up in Southern California, and pretty soon thereafter they're approached by a Saudi. We know the Saudi reaches out, meets them in the restaurant, arranges housing for them, arranges payment to them, arranges to move them to San Diego. And that Saudi has connections to the Saudi government, and some people believe that guy was a Saudi intelligence officer. There was a strong relationship between the CIA director and the Minister of Intelligence in Saudi Arabia.
You knew that Hazmi was in the United States.
That's correct, sir.
That's January now of 2001, another failure.
George Tenet, the CIA director, knew in advance that there would be an attack.
Why not raise it in the September 4th principals meeting?
The 9/11 Commission itself indicated that investigations or interrogations of al-Midhar, once he was identified, could have yielded evidence of connections to other participants in the 9/11 plot. The simple fact of their detention could have derailed the plan. In any case, the opportunity was not there.
No. 50 CIA personnel knew about this. We therefore conclude that there was a high-level decision in the CIA ordering people not to share that information. Because unless somebody intervened to stop the normal automatic distribution, I would automatically get it. You have to intervene and say, no, I don't want that report to go.
The opportunity was not there.
Alleged terrorist Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Zahami lived with and rented from an FBI informant.
The opportunity was not there.
The CIA was tracking Midhar at a June 2001 meeting.
They were ordered to let Mohammed Atta and others back into the U.S. in the year before 9/11.
The CIA analyst acknowledged to the Joint Inquiry staff that he had seen the information regarding al-Midhar's U.S. visa and al-Hazmi's travel to the United States.
I was repeatedly told to issue visas to unqualified applicants.
They were ordered by the CIA to give them visas to come to the U.S.
And they simply brought them through there, knowing that they would be protected by the agency.
Number one, I would have had much stronger immigration policies. I'm not saying I would have prevented it, but I would have had a chance.
The hijackers came in on tourist
visa
visas and student
The visas are too easy.
So you
I would have had a much tougher,
you wouldn't allow those.
11 of the 19 alleged 9/11 hijackers would go on to get their visas from the same consulate.
The New York Times would report that the Defense Department said that Atta had gone to the International Officer School at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, Abdul Aziz Al-Amari to the Aerospace Medical School at Brooks Air Force Base in Texas, and Saeed Al-Ghamdi to the Defense Language Institute at the Presidio. Newsweek reported that U.S. military sources have given information that suggests 5 of the alleged hijackers received training at secure U.S. military installations. Saeed Al-Ghamdi, Ahmed Al-Nami, and Ahmed Al-Ghamdi listed their address on driver's licenses and car registrations as the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida.
Stephen Butler, the head of the Defense Language School, went public and said these hijackers were trained at U.S. bases, including our base.
If they announce on September 4th in the principals meeting that these guys are in the United States, and they told the FBI a few weeks ago, I'm going to say, wait, time out. How long have you known this? Why haven't you reported it at the daily threat meetings? Why isn't it in the daily threat matrix? We would have begun an investigation that day into CIA malfeasance and misfeasance. That's why we're not informed.
The opportunity was not there.
John O'Neill was the FBI counter-terror chief responsible for the investigation into Osama bin Laden. On August 22, 2001, after claims of repeated obstruction of his investigations into Saudi funding, O'Neill left the FBI.
I was found dead on September 11th, found in the rubble of the World Trade Center. And he also talked to the foreign press before he died, mainstream foreign press, and said the government's going to allow bin Laden to attack for a pretext for war. Bush took FBI agents off bin Laden family trail.
Robert Wright and others within the FBI also had their investigations into terrorism stopped.
The U.S. administration was using kid gloves in tracking down Osama bin Laden and other fanatics linked to Saudi Arabia. A special BBC investigation has reported
The opportunity was not there.
As an undercover operative for the FBI, he was known as Mohammed. His real name is Eli Assad. In early 2001, the FBI sent Assad to infiltrate this small mosque outside Miami. There, he says, he spotted and even recorded conversations with the man later identified as 9/11 hijack leader Mohammed Atta, as well as several others in his group.
You saw them?
Yes, and even I prayed in the mosque, the private mosque, and I went to certain private meetings.
Assad says while he was posing as a bomb maker, he's the one on the right, and producing weapons for the wannabes, the real terrorists were left alone. Shortly after the attacks, Assad says he identified Atta as the man the FBI told him to leave alone.
You were that close?
It confirmed what my suspicions were correct. I was right. I was 100% right.
The opportunity was not there.
Along with Atta at the mosque was another al-Qaeda figure, Adnan Shukrajuma, now a fugitive with a $5 million U.S. reward on his head.
But I was directed not to be close to him.
Who directed you to leave Shukrajuma alone?
To stay away from him? The FBI?
Assad says the FBI agents involved with him have his reports and his tapes documenting what he saw, but none of that ever made its way into the 9/11 Commission report.
Because they didn't want to have to basically admit to the fact that they'd found Mohammed Atta and some of the other 9/11 hijackers in this database, and obviously if we found them, we could have done something to prevent the attack.
The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country.
To this day, I don't know why the blind sheikh was issued a U.S. visa to come to the United States. It's never been adequately explained. I don't think even the 9/11 Commission was able to get to the bottom of it.
He is the one who ordered the assassination of my president. Oh, well, guess what? He is an American. I said, it's a surprise for me because I know that since he escaped from Egypt, he is being listed on the terrorist lists and he should not be in any country. They said, well, somehow he managed to come to America, and he lives in New Jersey.
The blind sheikh and 11 of his disciples face multiple counts of conspiracy, including charges for the first World Trade Center bombing, the Landmarks terror plot.
5 targets: the United Nations, 26 Federal Plaza, which housing the FBI, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, and the Washington Bridge.
Salem requested an FBI safe house where he could help the cell build the bombs under covert government surveillance.
Now we need the people underground to come to help me to build that bomb.
Imad will try to compromise Rahman.
I told him that Sadi and I start to build something big, very big for the United Nations. What do you think? It is permissible? So Sheikh Omar answered, don't do it.
This recording by Ahmad Salem is, for the American justice system, the proof of the Sheikh's implication in the network's terrorist acts.
Sadiq and the informant discussed placing bombs in a car, driving that car into a building in the United Nations complex, and then detonating that bomb. The terrorists are accused of testing timing devices for the bomb, giving the confidential informant $300 to rent a safe house in Queens where the bombs would be made.
A stunning development in the case will haunt law enforcement for years to come. Documents in the boxes taken in 1990 after the Meyer Kahane shooting are finally translated from Arabic to English. One prophetic sentence jumps out, never seen until 2 years after the first attack on the World Trade Center, never fully appreciated until 9/11. We will bring down your high buildings.
You can't overstate the importance of the information in those boxes of evidence collected in connection with the Nosair trial. But you want to be looking at that the moment you have it, and that didn't happen.
Another missed opportunity to prevent the rise of terror cells committed to attacking the United States.
Apprehended soon afterwards, the blind sheikh is sentenced to life imprisonment.
An al-Qaeda spy named Ali Mohammed penetrated the CIA, the Green Berets, and the FBI before the 9/11 attacks. He managed to become a naturalized U.S. citizen, join the U.S. Army, get posted to the military base where Green Berets and Delta Force train, and infiltrate both the CIA and FBI. And while he was an FBI informant, he smuggled bin Laden in and out of Afghanistan and helped plan the attacks on U.S. embassies in Africa. He ended up playing a pivotal role in 9/11.
It turned out that the al-Qaeda members are people we trained in the beginning when I was involved in the Carter administration under Brzezinski, and then followed through in various other administrations.
We had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else.
Zbigniew Brzezinski's written 2 books bragging that in '79 they created the group, had them attack the Russians to get them to then invade Afghanistan so that the Soviets could have their, quote, Vietnam. This is a fact.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role.
In the early 1980s, bin Laden worked with operatives from U.S. intelligence, the Pakistani military, and Arab states. They ran a wide-ranging covert network.
They came out, some of them from special forces, others from other divisions of the military, and were trained in Brooklyn and elsewhere.
He said to Patrick Fitzgerald across the table, I have a number of sleepers who I can make operational like that, and I can
this you have from what?
From Jack Clunan, the principal agent who was at the meeting. After the meeting, Patrick Fitzgerald turned to Clunan and said, that is the most dangerous man I have ever met. We cannot leave him on the street. And yet they did, Amy, for 10 more months.
Sufficient intelligence was available that should have prevented the attack.
It has to do with the fact that even though we had the information, bureaucrats, some of which are still in the system, went about trying to prevent it from being shared properly within the agencies of the government that could take action. So this is what the real cover-up is all about.
We did not have enough money. They were afraid we were going to hang somebody, that we would point the finger.
This was all about protecting the bureaucracy and the individuals in the bureaucracy.
It's much deeper than I thought. The deep staters.
There's a bureaucracy that's separate from the political parties, and I think that's what we have to always remember, that they will always try to protect themselves.
You know, the swamp and the swamp creatures are much deeper and much worse than we ever thought. And there is such a thing as the deep state. Who would think?
They've been able to get through a joint House investigation committee and get through the 9/11 Commission. And this has never come out. They got away with it.
Do you trust intelligence?
Not so much from the people that have been doing it for our country. I mean, look what's happened over the last 10 years. Look what's happened over the years. I mean, it's been catastrophic.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
Got it? There's no mistaking what that was. That's a threat.
We have an element in our country, some of which is in the institutions of our government, the Department of Justice, certainly the FBI, and other elements like the intelligence community, and they just do not want to see our country thrive.
Comey actually admitted that there's a deep state, and they hold a higher value system that they are protecting toward what they see as the interests of the United States.
From the day I took the oath of office, I've been fighting to drain the swamp. And sometimes it may not look like it, but believe me, we are draining the swamp. And there are a lot of unhappy people. You can see that every day. All you have to do is turn on the news. Every time you see me hit, you know that I'm draining the swamp.
There is an effort by the intelligence community in the United States to blackmail Donald Trump, to discredit him.
Next week, Mr. Trump is probably going to say that FDR was around when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
Lee and I write in our book that we think the commission in many ways was set up to fail.
We
do not claim in this report to have written the final truth.
The 9/11 Commission and the commissioners themselves were just there to whitewash it. They were blessed with the most brilliant staff you could imagine. But as commissioners, they were clearly there to not let the American people know what happened before 9/11.
You met with the director of the 9/11 Commission. Who was he? Where did you meet him? What did he say to you?
I was actually working at Bagram Air Force Base as undercover, working as part of the project in the book, Operation Dark Heart. I met Dr. Philip Zelikow in mid-October 2003.
Okay.
During that session, I disclosed the existence of Able Danger. And at the end of that hour, there was just stunned silence. And I talked about the fact that we discovered the 9/11 hijackers, at least 4 of them. I returned to Washington, D.C., January of 2004. Call in. They say, we want to see you. Stand by. Nothing happens. A week goes by. I call again. They say, we don't need you to come in. We have all the information on Able Danger we need. Thank you anyway. And that was where it ended.
And you were not permitted to testify.
Then the government's interest at this point, and I say this having dedicated my life to the government, becomes to soften the narrative. You know, smooth out the narrative, make everybody go to bed at night, think things are fine.
I met with one of the members of the 9/11 Commission in Philadelphia. I had a lunch with him, and during this lunch, I provided to him all the background that we're talking about now and in greater detail. During that meeting, he confirmed to me that he had never heard any of this.
I look at Abbottabad raid. I mean, I don't know, anybody in the military here? Yeah. I mean, you basically look at the range of Black Hawk helicopters, and they can't fly from Afghanistan to Abbottabad. They have to land, and they need a base of 500 people, a FARP. So where was that base? It's in the tribal areas. So there's huge parts of this narrative that the governments just really like to, you know, we're doing our best. It doesn't mean that there's a conspiracy theory necessarily. It's what they don't want to do is admit they don't have answers to the questions.
It was a whitewash and a lie from top to bottom.
We get a report from CBS News as to where bin Laden was the night before the 9/11 attacks. He was in a Pakistani military hospital in Rawalpindi.
Pakistan intelligence sources tell CBS News that bin Laden was spirited into this military hospital in Rawalpindi for kidney dialysis treatment.
And 2 months before 9/11, it's reported bin Laden received kidney dialysis at the American hospital in Dubai. That is according to the French newspaper Le Figaro. Bin Laden stayed at the hospital for 10 days. And then there is an even more extraordinary claim.
Between the 4th and 14th of July 2001, Osama bin Laden had been visited by an American civil servant called Larry Mitchell, who we were able to find out, after checking, was the local representative of the CIA.
An operation as sophisticated as carried out yesterday was an operation that was concealed from us for months, and there is no reason to believe that these same people weren't capable of covering their tracks somehow on the way out. Now, I would go so far as to say that this group who was responsible for that, if they didn't have an Osama bin Laden out there, they'd invent one, because he's a terrific diversion for the rest of the world.
On September 13th, the United States government declares that it has overwhelming evidence that bin Laden is responsible for the attacks. The Taliban offers to hand over Osama bin Laden if the United States can provide evidence.
The Secretary of State said the administration would soon be able to document its case in public.
But is there any plan to present public evidence in the case against bin Laden?
I think as Secretary Powell said, there's hope to do that.
Instead of taking credit, bin Laden denies involvement in the attacks. December 26th, 2001. A Taliban official claims that he has attended the funeral of Osama bin Laden. The next day, a video believed to be recorded on November 19th is broadcast, in which bin Laden praises the attack, but takes no responsibility.
When the ambassador calls in the governor Riyadh, the current king of Saudi Arabia, he's pounding on the table and says, why were there 15 Saudis on those airplanes? You know what the king answered in a back channel, or in a very private conversation? He said it was a Mossad operation, and that's as far as the Saudis would go. So we don't know, and I certainly don't know, how those 15 Saudis got on those airplanes. Somebody recruited them. Somebody said, go to the United States. And had to vet them. Because if you're going to hijack an airplane, you better know who your hijacker is. But we still don't have those answers. So since I've left the CIA, I keep on picking away at these things.
I not only held the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary and a military Navy officer, I also held an intelligence position before 9/11. I was asked to come into the Pentagon, to the Office of Low Intensity Conflict. The intelligence community had to come to me very quickly because I not only oversaw some of the elements of the CIA and military intelligence and other elements of intelligence. I immediately got confessions from 2 CIA operatives
who worked under SOLIC, Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict. I was furious. I knew it had happened. I taught stand down and false flag operations at the National War College.
They admitted to me that there was a stand down. The deputy to Paul Wolfowitz admitted it to me.
I knew the Pakistani senior intelligence officer was coming here because I was forewarned by one of his predecessors, Yaqub Khan, that the Pakistani generals were involved.
Yaqub Khan was the foreign minister of Pakistan, was our ambassador to the United States, but was the father of the Pakistani army. As a result of that, I got to know the various generals throughout his ranks, who they were, and he talked to me about Al-Zia, Musharraf, Benazir Bhutto, her father, what would happen. So I intimately got to know both the military elements of this incredible army. They were useful in the fight against the Soviet Union. But at the same time, I was clearly warned very early on that they would turn against us using Yaqub Khan. I knew exactly where the elements were, the concerns they had about the CIA continuously supporting the Inter-Service Intelligence Agency, the fact that the ISI was getting out of control, was no longer under military or civilian control in Pakistan, and was beginning to form their own so-called groups, or we call terrorist groups, as a forefront to making sure that Pakistan had a ancillary army, or basically an auxiliary army or paramilitary unit that could fight against India.
Pakistani chief and spy general Mahood Ahmad wired $100,000 to Muhammad Atta, the lead hijacker. Source, Washington Post, New York Times, you name it. But what we do know is this general, this Pakistani spy chief, is here in the United States after he wires $100,000 to the so-called head hijacker, Muhammad Atta. He is in D.C., and not just in D.C., he's at the Capitol the morning of September 11th eating breakfast with the heads of the House and Senate Intelligence Committee.
Israeli operatives immediately called me up.
Investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance.
These people had been shadowing the terrorists that blew up the buildings, living in the vicinity and keeping up with them.
How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained. Active Israeli military were among those detained.
Whether it's because they're in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
They served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities.
And why was Anwar al-Awlaki, the man who may now inherit al-Qaeda, invited to lunch at the Pentagon only months after the attacks?
This email, obtained exclusively by Fox News, confirms that al-Awlaki was invited to and attended a lunch in a Pentagon executive dining room on February 5th, 2002. At the time, besides the known relationship with at least 3 of the hijackers, al-Awlaki had a rap sheet.
You know, one thing that happens in agent recruitment is we think we've recruited the agent, but then later we discover that they're playing us. Here's a double agent. That's possible.
Al-Awlaki has become more operational, with direct links to the massacre at Fort Hood, failed underwear bomber, and the failed attack on Times Square.
He is used as a kind of beacon to recruit patsies across the world.
There are reports today that the Christmas Day body bomber met with an American-born radical cleric, Anwar al-Awlaki.
Double agent, a triple agent.
Well, it was Kurt Haskell and, of course, his wife, both lawyers, who witnessed the sharp-dressed man getting him on the plane without the passport. And a month and a half later, the State Department came out and said, well, it is true that an unnamed U.S. agency asked us to help him get a visa.
So DHS had the information prior to Christmas Day.
They had the individual under investigation, and our revocation action would have disclosed U.S. government's interest in that individual and ended our colleagues' ability, such as the FBI, to pursue the case quietly.
Was the man known as the underwear bomber a pawn in a larger plan by our own government? We told you about the two local attorneys, both passengers on board that plane on Christmas Day of 2009. They believe the government was behind the scare in the air.
The U.S. government gave Muttalib an intentionally defective bomb.
It's a shocking allegation, but Kurt Haskell remembers seeing Abdul Muttalib at their gate at the airport in Amsterdam. He didn't have a passport, but Haskell says a man with an American accent in a tan suit helped him board anyway.
Can the federal government take credit for saving us from a plot of its own creation? Tonight, has the federal government kept us safe, or does it just want us to think that it has kept us safe? Since the tragedy of 9/11, numerous crazies and low-level copycats have engaged in criminal behavior which they hoped would result in the deaths of innocent Americans and somehow advance their cause of jihad. If you ask the leadership of the FBI, it will tell you that the FBI, has foiled about 17 plots to kill Americans during the past 10 years. The 17 that were interrupted by the feds were created by the feds. They all have a common and reprehensible thread. They were planned, plotted, controlled, and carried out by the federal government itself. In all of these 17 cases, from the Fort Dix 6 to the Lackawanna 7 to the Portland parade bomber, the feds found young men of Muslim backgrounds, loners who were bitter at America. They befriended them, cajoled them, and persuaded them that they could change the world by killing Americans. In all these cases, agents worked undercover and portrayed themselves to the targets as Arabs of like un-American mind. In some cases, the federal agents used third parties to act as middlemen.
These people may have hated the country, they may have even been radical in their minds, but they had no means to carry out the things they were accused of. They only became dangerous once they were set up through these FBI systems.
These entrapment cases are fake. Let it go in. Real crimes. This person took no overt act to commit a crime until he met the FBI informant who set him up.
Without his performance, none of this would have happened. He's dealing with 7 basically inner city kids from Liberty City. Poor, uneducated, looking for money.
Are any of these plots criminal? Can the government just pick and choose whom to seduce and then lower the boom at the right time and arrest its would-be Confederates? Is this a proper and efficient use of law enforcement resources? The answers to these questions are obvious, and they are not good.
So what we have here is distortion, psyop, disinformation.
I can just state that within 9/11 there are too many secrets, that is, information that has not been made available to the public, for which there are specific, tangible, credible answers.
Both NORAD and the FAA continued to give inaccurate information about the attacks for 2 years after 9/11. A member of the 9/11 Commission says his panel didn't trust testimony from Pentagon officials. Here's the question. What does it mean if the 9/11 Commission thought the Pentagon was not telling the truth about the day of the attacks?
President Bush has said again and again that no one could have imagined what Osama bin Laden ordered for September 11th.
NORAD had already in the works plans to simulate in an exercise a simultaneous hijacking of 2 planes in the United States.
With actual pilots on the flight deck, FBI agents would hijack the planes and divert them to secure locations.
According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon.
That one possibility was not something that they had imagined was likely.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
In what the CIA describes as bizarre coincidence, the U.S. intelligence agency was planning an exercise on September 11th, 2001, in which a hijacked jet aircraft is flown into the World Trade Center. Ladies and gentlemen,
NORAD conducted exercises using hijacked airliners as weapons. And one target
was the World Trade Center.
We had 4 war games going on September 11th.
We fought many phantoms that day. We got many aircraft calls inbound that morning that turned out to be phantoms.
Is this real world or exercise?
So between all the drills before 9/11 and the drill in the morning of 9/11, air traffic controllers thought that it was a simulation.
Hijacked aircraft headed towards New York.
During that time frame, we had multiple aircraft called hijacked all over the country.
These exercises would not cease until after United 93 was brought down and the attacks were over.
Okay, I need you to terminate all exercise inputs coming to Cheyenne Mountain at this time. Copy. Okay, no, do not do any more inputs on the exercise side and stand by.
September 11th was day 2 of Vigilant Guardian, an exercise staged by the Joint Chiefs and NORAD, which simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern United States.
Exercises involving hijacked aircraft that would go in and out of radar. These would appear real to those involved.
Vigilant Guardian is a branch of Global Guardian, a mass Armageddon exercise being conducted at Offutt Air Force Base in cooperation with NORAD. The exercise is reportedly canceled after the second Twin Tower is hit.
The drill would pose all sorts of threats, and even mobilize command centers known as doomsday planes that house top military personnel.
The E-4B is a state-of-the-art flying command post.
There is also footage of another white mystery plane in the restricted airspace over New York City before the second attack, and as the second plane strikes the World Trade Center. Northern Vigilance would redirect fighter jets out of the northeastern sector to patrol Canada and Alaska.
Fort Belvoir, an Army base 10 miles south of the Pentagon, is preparing for an exercise intended to test security in case of a terrorist attack. Employees in the Office of Emergency Management on the 23rd floor of World Trade Center Building 7 continue preparations for Tripod, a biological attack drill scheduled for September 12th.
The next day, on September 12th, Pier 92 was going to have a drill. It had hundreds of people here, from FEMA, from the federal government, from the state emergency management office, and they were getting ready for a drill for biochemical attack. The equipment was already there, so we were able to establish a command center there within 3 days that was 2.5 to 3 times bigger than the command center that we had lost at 7 World Trade Center.
This very interesting information, Katie, Matt, and Tom, from the FBI. They have been operating a massive exercise. There is a real breakdown of the FBI anti-terror coordination team.
The confusion caused throughout the system on 9/11 seems to be the contributing factor of why the perpetrators were so successful in carrying out their missions.
Hey, turn the swim switches off.
ACARS data, a device used for communicating with aircraft, show UA-175 still airborne in western Pennsylvania.
Scoggins Military, Boston Center, just had a report that American 11 is still in the air and it's on its way heading towards Washington.
Okay, American 11 is still in the air? Okay, so American 11 isn't the hijack at all then, right?
No, he is a hijack. American 11 is the airplane that we're under the premise that has already crashed into the Trade Center.
Right.
War games, simulated radar tracks, inaccurate aircraft position reports, false aircraft target reports, aircraft converging, flying virtually in formation with, and then diverging from reported 9/11 aircraft. Aircraft seemingly still airborne after the attacks. Fighters launched in the wrong directions, poor communications, phones not working.
We cannot call out for some reason.
All right, let me have your number.
It seems the perpetrators were extremely lucky all morning on 9/11. How would the hijackers know to strike on such a chaotic day with the U.S. under minimal defense?
As one of the most seismic moments in American history was unfolding, the president was in the most unlikely of settings. Moments before entering that Florida classroom, he'd been told a small plane had hit the first tower.
I walked up to the president and I leaned over and I whispered into his right ear, "A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack." And I looked at the president. I could still see him facing forward with his head bobbing up and down. I honestly believe he was thinking about the burden that he accepted when he took the oath of office. He did nothing. He did nothing. He did nothing. 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 Nothing.
Two F-15s are ordered to scramble from Otis Air Force Base on Cape Cod to intercept that airliner that has just hit the North Tower. Those F-15s don't get airborne until 8:53, and once they do, they're not vectored into the city. They were vectored to a holding pattern 100 miles east. Now at 9:03, United 175 crashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. At that same time, Air Defense Command is notified of United 175 about the time it hits the South Tower. 6 minutes later, F-16s are given the order to go to battle stations out of Langley Air Force Base in Southern Virginia. At 9:13, the F-15s in the holding pattern east of New York City are directed inbound. They arrive over Manhattan at 9:25, 22 minutes after United 175 hit the South Tower.
What happens if an unidentified aircraft flies into the no-fly zone right above the President of the United States? The plane won't leave the airspace. Will you shoot them down?
If required, we'll execute the rules of engagement per the commander of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. And yes, we would do that.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, Vice President Dick Cheney was in control of NORAD. On June 1st, 2001, just 3 months before 9/11, Dick Cheney ordered Donald Rumsfeld to take control of NORAD itself and the shoot-down procedure and remove that power from the generals so they could do nothing.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? It's like they came into the Pentagon.
To stand down means that we're telling our soldiers, our national security apparatus, the FAA, to literally not interfere with an imminent attack.
3 F-16s take off. 2 of them are armed with missiles and guns. 1 is armed with guns only. Those F-16s were supposed to have gone to a cap station over Baltimore, but instead, because of confusion, they head to a position well east of Washington, D.C. American Airlines Flight 77 hits the west side of the Pentagon at 9:38. At that time, the F-16s out of Langley are 150 miles away to the east.
Even the 9/11 Commission admits they haven't been told the truth.
Fog of war could explain why some people were confused on the day of 9/11. But it could not explain why all of the after-action reports, accident investigations, and public testimony by FAA and NORAD officials advanced an account of 9/11 that was untrue. A Pentagon audit declassified last year found DOD did not accurately report to the 9/11 Commission on the response to the September 11, 2001 hijackings. Still, so far, government investigators stopped short of calling all these inaccuracies lies.
There are thousands of these terrorists in more than 60 countries. They are recruited from their own nations and neighborhoods and brought to camps in places like Afghanistan.
I hope and believe that the United States will now adopt a policy of taking action against countries like Iraq and Iran and Syria and Sudan.
Maybe Gaddafi, maybe one or more else that are ready.
You have the power now to act. Summon the will.
We had pre-positioned soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq 6 to 9 months beforehand.
Bin Laden had done enough to justify what he might suffer in the future.
The administration did have a plan in the works, and that plan was on the president's desk the weekend before 9/11.
Well, Tom, U.S. and foreign sources tell NBC News that only 2 days before 9/11, President Bush was given what amounted to a detailed war plan. It's pretty much the same plan that the White House, CIA, and Pentagon quickly put into action immediately after the attacks on 9/11.
In this game of counterterrorism, which is really a game, a very sick game, we create what is called, under Kissinger, strategic tension.
If they didn't have an Osama bin Laden out there, they'd invent one.
Those people who are so enthusiastic about covert operations should remember, first of all, they don't remain secret for very long. And they should ask themselves, if this operation becomes public, what will be the reaction?
The fourth phase is the phase that deals with the conquest of the hearts and minds of the population.
The legacy of stay-behinds is that the tactics that created the stay-behinds in the first place are still in place and continue to be used today. They are standard operating procedure.
This is the war that was fought, and is still fought today, by means of low-intensity conflicts, even by means of what we define as terrorism.
Known as the strategy of tension.
Rather than a full-blown coup, destabilize the public order, to stabilize the political order, and justify a repressive intervention that would be welcomed with relief by the population.
In 2002, the Department of Homeland Security was created in response to the 9/11 attacks. Unbeknownst to many Americans, detailed plans for Homeland Security had already been developed.
That same month, Congress voted to trade people's individual privacy for the sake of national security.
It is now my honor to sign into law the USA Patriot Act of 2001.
This law gave the U.S. government sweeping new surveillance powers.
All of these so-called villains are used for national security purposes.
Even bin Laden's displays of strength for the Western media were faked. The fighters in this video had been hired for the day bin Laden had no formal organization, until the Americans invented one for him. In January 2001, a trial began. Prosecutors needed evidence of a criminal organization, because as with the mafia, that would allow them to prosecute the head of the organization, even if he could not be linked directly to the crime.
I don't know whether we're going to get him tomorrow, or a month from now, or a year from now. But we're going to get him, dead or alive.
This is a fortress, yes, a complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and offices on the top, as you can see. Secret exits on the side and on the bottom. Cut deep to avoid thermal detection. A ventilation system to allow people to breathe and to carry on. The entrance is large enough to drive trucks and even tanks, even computer systems and telephone systems. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
But all they found were a few small caves, which were either empty or had been used to store ammunition.
Now, you know, say what you want, but then we went out and we attacked the wrong country, because we went out and attacked Iraq.
I knew immediately they would go into Iraq. I was teaching at the National War College at Fort McNair. I warned our generals and I warned our colonels, if you go into Iraq, you will be defeated. This is not a conventional war.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon. One of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September.
I think few people would say the war in Iraq was a positive. You had him on the aircraft carrier saying all sorts of wonderful things, how the war was essentially over. Guess what? Not over. And, you know, the war with Iraq is a disaster. Now Iran is taking over Iraq, as sure as you're sitting there. They're taking the oil, they're taking everything. I said take the oil. I was against the war in Iraq, by the way. I was the only one on the stage. Believe me, you should get some points for vision. But I was totally against the war in Iraq. I said it's going to destabilize the Middle East. And then when they went in, I said when they're getting out, take the oil. They didn't take the oil. So now Iran is going to have the oil and ISIS has the oil. And ISIS, this has fueled ISIS, because ISIS now has so much money because they've had the oil.
We fueled and created ISIS out of this.
Dwight Eisenhower, the military, beware the military-industrial complex. They're right.
There was a very strong push in those days for us to go into Iraq, and there was absolutely no intelligence, zero, that pointed toward Al-Qaeda, that pointed toward the Iraqis. And yet there was an element there that was pushing to go into Iraq.
We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East.
Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy.
In order to establish a prepositioning in the Middle East, in Iraq.
I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, "We still going to attack Iraq?" He said, "I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran."
In 1996, a group of neocons wrote a report intended as advice for incoming Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It called for a clean break with the peace process rolling back Syria and removing Saddam Hussein from power.
In 2000, they would craft yet another proposed national security strategy, calling itself the Project for the New American Century. The elimination of states like Iraq figured prominently in this grand vision.
The Project for the New American Century wrote to President Clinton, urging removing Saddam's regime from power. 18 people signed, half now in the administration, including Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and his influential deputy, Paul Wolfowitz.
In their defining document, written in September of 2000, a full year before 9/11, they acknowledged that the process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent, in their own chilling words, some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
In some future hearing, I am going to say that I do not want to be sitting before this panel in a modern-day version of a Pearl Harbor post-mortem. Who didn't do what, when, where, and why? It would be wrong to think that someone who wrote it, namely me, was prescient. I wasn't. I simply had read enough history that I worried.
Preemptive action, regime change. After 9/11, those neocon policies were just what George Bush was looking for.
And the group would not have been so powerful was it not for an administration and a president who is susceptible and is willing to adopt many of those ideas.
Bush is the one who got us into the quicksand of the Middle East, and after spending trillions of dollars and killing nearly 1 million people, the Middle East was left in worse shape after 21 years than it was when he started his stupidity.
Going after Saddam Hussein was topic A 10 days after the inauguration, 8 months before September 11th.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake.
As Treasury Secretary, O'Neill was a permanent member of the National Security Council. It's all about finding a way to do it. That was the tone of it. The president saying, "Go find me a way to do this."
One of the cabinet members present leaned over to me and said, "Hugh, I know I shouldn't even be asking you this, but what would you really need in order to go in and take out Saddam in a precipitous event? Something that would make us look good in the eyes of the world. Could you have one of your U-2s fly low enough and slow enough so as to guarantee that Saddam could shoot it down?" The hair on the back of my neck bristled, my teeth clenched, and my fist tightened.
One needs only to read the plans known as Operation Northwoods, which the Joint Chiefs of Staff worked up in 1962. This plan contained various pretexts which would provide justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. Some of them would have involved killing Americans. For example, we could blow up a ship, a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay, and blame Cuba.
The federal government proposed blowing up airliners full of Americans, saying that casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of indignation. The mad general, the architect of this plan, was General L.L. Lemonster, Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. He got approval for his Faustian plan all the way up to the Secretary of Defense. President Kennedy was not amused. In the plan, they elaborated on how they could bomb Washington, D.C. and blame it on Cuba. Attack Marines at Guantanamo Bay using U.S. Army soldiers dressed up as Cubans. Or, they said, just like the sinking of the Maine to get into the Spanish-American War, we could blow up a ship.
I taught stand down and false flag operations at the National War College. I taught it with all my operatives. It was done during Pearl Harbor.
President Roosevelt told General Marshall to send a message to the Hawaiian and Philippine commanders: don't interfere with Japan's overt act of war. The United States desires that Japan commit the first overt act.
Jeb was so stupid that he literally reiterated what his brother said and Rumsfeld quoted about Pearl Harbor.
Next week, Mr. Trump is probably going to say that FDR was around when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
And Donald Rumsfeld, who knows who I am, Donald Rumsfeld said the following words: whoever accuses this administration must accuse Franklin Roosevelt of allowing Pearl Harbor. It was studied very carefully by the University of Chicago in the 1970s under Roberta and Walter Wallstetter. The primary student was a man by the name of Wolfowitz. Wolfowitz was the deputy secretary under Rumsfeld. These were all students of the stand-down theory.
Channel 4 News has seen a secret memo. George Bush even floats the idea of trying to lure Saddam into war by flying an American spy plane over Iraq painted in UN colors.
If Saddam fired on them, he would be in breach.
You may not think those types of things still happen in Washington, but trust me, they do.
And it means that at senior levels in the US administration, crazy, illegal, deceitful proposals like that were actually being contemplated to trigger a war by deceit.
I have said, and I say again, that impeachment is off the table.
WMDs, Iraq, Katrina, Valerie Plame, signing statements, torture, wiretaps, secret prisons.
She'd reached her decision not to do it, and years later she explained why.
The argument against President Bush was about a president and an administration that sent us into a war based on a false representation of the threat of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Let me tell you, as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in 5 different administrations, if there were grounds for impeachment, then you better put Cheney and Bush Jr. away from prison, because they're the ones who started the Iraq War, and guess for what? Cheney's oil company and Bush's oil company.
I do think people could have made a case about President Bush, but I did not want to go down that path because of what it would mean for the American people.
The Washington establishment and the financial and media corporations that fund it exist for only one reason: to protect and enrich itself.
I tell the truth, okay? There were no weapons of mass destruction.
It appears that there were not weapons of mass destruction there.
You said you knew where they were. We were told Saddam was training al-Qaeda. They showed the world, once they took over Iraq, the mobile anthrax labs that launched the attacks on America.
Colin Powell didn't lie.
Every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
The anthrax mobile labs were British hardware sold to the Iraqis on record that were for pumping up hydrogen balloons.
I cannot tell you why within the intelligence community, the people who had put out burn notices, meaning don't trust this source, those burn notices never rose to the right level. And one of the things I'm most irate about is that I have reason to believe in the CIA, the nights we were out there till midnight every night, putting this presentation together and trying to make it airtight, there were people in the room who knew that burn notices had gone out on some of these sources.
The idea that he was lying or duped is nonsense. He believed it.
But you were wrong.
Oh my goodness, the intelligence was certainly wrong.
If you had known he did not have them.
I didn't know.
If you had.
I didn't.
If you had.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
The fact that the government would permit deception, that they would continue and perpetuate the lie, suggests that we need a full investigation of what is going on and what is demonstrably an incompetent and at worst deceitful federal government.
Then Obama came in, and normally you want to clean up. He made a bigger mess out of it. He made such a mess. And then you had Hillary with Libya. So sad.
Former Deputy CIA Director Mike Morrell yesterday admitted that when he edited the White House talking points, he specifically removed the word Islamic from the term Islamic extremists in his talking points.
I took it out because we were dealing with protests and demonstrations across much of the Muslim world as a result of the video. And the last thing I wanted to do was to do anything to further inflame those passions.
Well, if you think back to this time, it was not just Morrell who was trying to placate the Muslim world during this time. Do you remember this effort by the President and the Secretary of State? They put this message out, squarely blaming the murders on the video and recording a message of apology that was to be run on television in Pakistan.
What we do know is that the natural protests that arose because of the outrage over the video. It was a crude and disgusting video
Well, what we know now, Martha, is the video had absolutely nothing to do with the attack on Benghazi. The question is, how soon did the administration know it? They knew it on September the 12th in the State Department email where they call it Islamic extremism. That is the cause that they cited of the attack. Nothing about a video. No one on the ground in Benghazi mentioned a video.
We went from mistakes in Iraq to Egypt to Libya to President Obama's line in the sand in Syria. Each of these actions have helped to throw the region into chaos and gave ISIS the space it needs to grow and prosper.
In 2012, your agency was saying, quote, the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. In 2012, the US was helping coordinate arms transfers to those same groups.
As I've said before, this aspect of our strategy was moving too slowly, but the fall of Ramadi has galvanized the Iraqi government. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province.
Now, U.S. military aircraft have dropped ammunition in areas held by ISIL terror group in Iraq.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake.
I will tell you, it goes before 2012. I mean, when we were in Iraq, and we still had decisions to be made before there was a decision to pull out of Iraq in 2011. I mean, it was very clear what we were going to face.
Well, I admire your frankness on this subject.
Very clear what we were going to face.
Let me just before we move on, just to clarify once more. You are basically saying that even in government at the time, you knew those groups were around, you saw this analysis, and you were arguing against it. But who wasn't listening?
I think the administration.
The administration turned a blind eye to your analysis.
I don't know if they turned a blind eye. I think it was a decision. I think it was a willful decision.
A willful decision to go support an insurgency that had Salafists, Al-Qaeda, and Muslim
a willful
Brotherhood.
decision to do what they're doing, which you'd have to really ask the president, what is it that he actually is doing with the policy that is in place, because it is very, very confusing.
We're led by a man that either is not tough, not smart, or he's got something else in mind. And the something else in mind, people can't believe it. People cannot believe that President Obama is acting the way he acts and can't even mention the words radical Islamic terrorism. There's something going on. It's inconceivable.
Obama said some time back, America is not a Christian nation. He is a liar, a thief, and a traitor. America is, as far as I'm concerned, a Christian nation based on Christian principles. We live under the umbrella of a Christian-based, Christian Judeo country that believes in that Bible.
He put out a secret national, a presidential study directive number 11. And actually, it sanctioned the Muslim Brotherhood. That presidential study directive is still in effect today and must be canceled. It needs to be declassified so every American understands what that president did and how he embraced the Muslim Brotherhood, who are out to destroy our Constitution.
In fact, in many respects, ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS. Okay? He's the founder. He founded ISIS.
Kerry was announcing that regime change was Obama's only objective in Syria. And in fact, the administration not only hoped that ISIS would carry out the task, it gave arms to the jihadist army and its allies.
We are army. And training. I think we've been putting an extraordinary amount of arms in, haven't we?
Yeah, the groups, the armed groups in Syria get a lot of support. Not just from the United States, but from other partners. And we've never said that
Qatar, Russia, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, huge amount of weapons coming in. Huge amount of money.
But pumping weapons in causes someone else to pump more weapons in, and you end up with a level.
I mean, the reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus and so forth. And that's why Russia came in, because they didn't want a Daesh government. And they supported Assad. and we know that this was growing. We were watching. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength, and we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage, that Assad might then negotiate. Instead of negotiating, you got Assad. Now you got Putin to support him. And we're trying to empower Syrians to be able to fight against this guy. Now the Russians have changed the equation, unfortunately. The Russians have changed the equation.
Look, ISIS got started through funding from our friends and allies, because as people will tell you in the region, if you want somebody who will fight to the death against Hezbollah, you don't put out a recruiting poster and say, sign up for us, we're going to make a better world. You go after zealots, and you go after these religious fundamentalists. That's who fights Hezbollah.
Where did ISIS start? Clarissa Ward has traced its roots back to a U.S. military prison.
Camp Bucca was known as the largest and one of the toughest American prisons in Iraq. But there is growing evidence that the sprawling prison was also the birthplace of ISIS. According to a CBS News investigation, at least 12 of the top leaders of ISIS served time at Camp Bucca, including the man who would become the group's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He spent only 10 months at Camp Bucca.
In 2005, during the U.S. occupation of Iraq, American soldiers arrested al-Baghdadi.
During his time there, he would have rubbed shoulders with some of the most dangerous Islamic extremists.
I think it's undeniable that one of the main causes of ISIS's explosive growth after 2010 was Bucca. It's where they met, it's where they planned. Everybody could see what was happening.
I would say the co-founder would be crooked Hillary Clinton. Co-founder, crooked Hillary Clinton.
We saw that Daesh was growing in strength, and we thought Assad was threatened. Instead of negotiating, you got Assad. Now you got Putin to support him.
We are going to drain the swamp. We need competence, and we need it fast. Hillary Clinton, who turned Libya into a nightmare. How about Libya? How about Benghazi?
Many people would argue that the US actually saw the rise of ISIL coming and turned a blind eye, or even encouraged it as a counterpoint to Assad. And a secret analysis by the agency you ran, the Defense Intelligence Agency, in August 2012 says there is a possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime. The US saw the ISIL caliphate coming and did nothing.
I mean, we argued about the different groups that were there, and we said, who is it that is involved here? And I will tell you that I do believe that the intelligence was very clear.
Kerry was announcing that regime change was Obama's only objective in Syria. And in fact, the administration not only hoped that ISIS would carry out the task, it gave arms to the jihadist army and its ally.
The CIA was providing arms, intelligence, money, and other types of support to these armed militants who were working hand in hand and who are working hand in hand, and oftentimes under the command of Al-Qaeda.
America's National Security Act of 1947 provided the legal foundation for covert action and what was termed unorthodox warfare.
NSC 10/2 says that all means must be used, including setting up secret armies, including, manipulating the population with fear or propaganda.
Over a period of about 15 years, Europe was rocked by a series of terror attacks.
What came out was the existence of a secret clandestine structure headed by the chief of the Italian secret services and codenamed Gladio.
Documents connected this mysterious force to NATO. The Italian Prime Minister, Giulio Andreotti, was forced to go public, causing a major European scandal. Andreotti admitted that the secret organization Gladio existed. He also revealed that it was part of a much wider network of secret armies coordinated by NATO.
Italy was a key element in the southern flank of NATO, and the Communist Party of Italy opposed every practical measure to strengthen NATO.
They created the image of a hidden international web of evil
coordinated by Moscow. They themselves had made it up.
Very clear episodes were CIA black propaganda, clandestine information.
And now they saw this new war on terror in the same epic terms.
Even the New York Times is having to report on it. Obama wanted ISIS to grow, leaked audio, and that's addressing the Syrian opposition.
When he was campaigning, he was a new and fresh and beautiful idea, but when he gets into office, he becomes the extension of the policies of the neoconservatives.
For the sake of our country and our people, there has to be continuity in American foreign policy.
I was a bit puzzled and troubled why national security policy remained almost unchanged from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. So many elements of that policy are virtually identical. It's an amazing continuity.
After President Bush was elected, we were briefed by the Clinton administration on many national security issues during the transition. On an operational level, therefore, we decided immediately to continue to pursue the Clinton administration's covert action authorities.
No American president, not one, and you can go down the list, was able to implement any changes inside the military sector of the economy or the intelligence sector. These two agencies of government were untouchable.
National security and double government.
There are two mechanisms of control in the U.S. The Madisonian public institutions of the Congress, presidency, and the courts, which maintain the necessary public illusion that they are in charge and in control of policy, while a secretive Trumanite network of unelected, unaccountable national security bureaucrats actually make and set policy that the Madisonians appear to implement as their own.
We choose leaders who are beholden to the Republic. It's part of an intelligence military complex, which Eisenhower had warned us about. You can see how the CIA maintains the integrity, or they feel the integrity of the Republic, in order to make sure that we don't have any disturbances from one administration to the other.
My father and uncle were fighting against this emergence of the military-industrial complex, and their deaths really marked a fork in the road for our country and for the rest of the world, where we started down this road towards corporatism, what I call the merger, this corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is driven by large industries. The spear tip, of course, is what Eisenhower warned us about 4 days before my uncle took office, which was the rise of the military-industrial complex, which has turned America into a warfare state abroad and a surveillance state at home, and which has gutted the middle class in this country.
Most of these people have come in and out. Bush Sr., he said, I'm going to go into the CIA in 1972. No, Bush Sr., you went into the CIA in 1957. You were corrupt.
Clinton had been given a Fulbright scholarship, a Rhodes Scholarship, went to Oxford but never appeared there with Stroke Talbot. He was reporting on massive anti-Soviet dissidents in Russia and reporting to the CIA.
Then we get who else? The idiot version of Bush Sr., Bush Jr. Then they immediately go into Iraq and Afghanistan with no reasons, no evidence whatsoever, but they're not arrested. And who comes in? Comey, Mueller, Hayden, all of the operatives that we've had so far. Obama, who was the son of an operative in Indonesia. She spoke Russian. He was the grandson of two operatives who worked for me in the East-West Center in Hawaii, i.e. the East-West Center is the banking institution for the CIA. He was CIA. He was an operative. That's why he lied. He consistently created wars. He had more wars than anybody I've ever seen. Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, all with the help of Hillary Clinton, another one of the CIA operatives.
Hillary Clinton was the biggest advocate for the destruction of Libya and Muammar Gaddafi. That man died, but he led his country. They had no debt. But the moment he gave up his weapons of mass destruction to come in out of the cold, they started stimulating the upset, the unrest. That's what America did in Libya. That's what they're doing in Syria. And the blowback now is they have created a refugee crisis that is destabilizing the countries in Europe.
CIA has led a legacy of ashes.
Robert Kennedy Jr. blaming the CIA for assassinating his uncle, former President John F. Kennedy, back on November 22nd, 1963.
There's a 60-year cover-up. The Warren Commission was run by Allen Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, who my uncle fired. Congress found that, it was a plot. It was a conspiracy. There were multiple people involved.
RFK Jr. adding there is overwhelming evidence that the CIA was involved in his murder. I think it's beyond a reasonable doubt at this point.
My uncle realized that he had been lied to by Charles Bell and Allen Dulles and Richard Bissell, the heads of the CIA, as well as its Joint Chiefs. And he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. So he recognized that the function of the intelligence agencies had devolved and that they had become captive of the military-industrial complex and the military contractors, and their function was essentially to provide our nation with a constant pipeline of new wars to feed the military-industrial complex and the growth of the surveillance state. And my father, when he ran for president, Pete Hamill, who was one of his favorite newsmen, asked him on the bus during 2 weeks before he died, asked him what he was going to do about the CIA. And he said, what we need to do is we need to remove the espionage branch from the plans division. The plans division of the CIA is essentially the dirty tricks provision. That's the division, the action division. They do the assassinations, they fix elections, they do paramilitary operations, black ops, torture, black sites, all of that stuff. And what my father understood is that the espionage division should not be working for the clandestine services. They should be overseeing them and particularly doing accountability.
And now, under the leadership of President Trump, we are fully realizing President Kennedy's prescient view.
We need to clean house of all of the warmongers and America Last globalists and the deep state, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the national security industrial complex. One of the reasons I was the only president in generations who didn't start a war is that I was the only president who rejected the catastrophic advice of many of Washington's generals, bureaucrats.
I've directed the Special Operations civilian leadership to report directly to me instead of through the current bureaucratic channels.
As we enact these reforms, we follow the vision of President John F. Kennedy, who predicted the rise of special operations nearly 60 years ago. He foresaw, quote, another type of war.
We have been providing direct and indirect support to Al-Qaeda, this very same terrorist group that attacked us on 9/11 and that we are supposed to be continuing to be fighting against and trying to defeat. And the thing that should make everyone feel sick is that people would rather support directly and indirectly Al-Qaeda than actually give up their regime change goals.
And of course, we had Rand Paul and his father Ron Paul coming out saying, look where ISIS is getting its weapons from. They've got billions of dollars worth of U.S. Humvees. We have the video where there's just a long line of these ISIS soldiers, and we're all thinking, well, if there was ever a time to take them out, that would have been it. How'd you get this footage of them?
ISIS is the bastard child of America's errant foreign policy.
We're cleaning everything up. It's so important What I'm doing is a service to this country.
You know, it's not about the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. It's about the people of America.
Millions of dollars in aid to Syria has been funneled to terrorists.
The State Department and USAID budget we discussed today is a proven investment in our national and economic security.
The Obama administration knowingly gave U.S. taxpayer dollars to an al-Qaeda affiliate. According to the USAID official, all this was done in consultation with and on the guidance of the State Department.
Rough numbers show that Hillary's campaign has raked in funding anywhere from 20 to 40% from the Saudi government, spurred on by her close association with the mysterious Huma Abedin. Breitbart reported the World Assembly of Muslim Youth is specifically named as having connections to terror funding and support for a number of worldwide terror groups. The Abedin family business is an academic group called the Institute for Muslim Minority Affairs that is based in the London offices of the World Assembly of Muslim Youth and its parent organization, the Muslim World League. Page 24 of the 28 pages discusses Osama bin Laden's half-brother and says in part, according to the FBI, Abdullah bin Laden has a number of connections to terrorist organizations. He is the president and director of the World Arab Muslim Youth Association. In 1998, the CIA published a paper characterizing WAMI as an NGO that provides funding, logistical support, and training with possible connections to the Arab Afghans network. At all times, Huma Abedin was working for both Hillary Clinton and the WAMI organization, the Institute for Muslim Minority Affairs.
How did she come back in 1996, get to the top of the political ladder, and become an assistant to Hillary Clinton? She's very much of an agent of influence and both operative and infiltrator on behalf of the Saudi Arabia.
Who gave her the top secret clearance that she had received after having been here only 2 years after 1996? John Brennan, who has been very close to the Saudi Arabians.
There's a early 2014 email from Hillary Clinton to her campaign manager, John Podesta. That email, it states that ISIS, is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
The Saudis and the Qataris are giving all this money to the Clinton Foundation while Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State and the State Department is approving massive arms sales. The consequence of that is that ISIS is created largely with money from the very people who are giving money to the Clinton Foundation.
Syria is an absolute mess, and it's not a mess because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has had to clean up the mess created by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton.
We're exposing something called that filthy, disgusting, horrible swamp, and we're cleaning it up.
This is a DIA document, Department of Defense Intelligence Agency. Administration knew of arms being shipped from Benghazi to Syria. Weapons from the former Libya military stockpiles were shipped from the port of Benghazi, Libya, to the port of Banias and the port of Borja Islam, Syria. During the immediate aftermath of and following the uncertainty caused by the downfall of the Gaddafi regime in October 2011, which of course was precipitated by American military might, Obama and Hillary Clinton participated in the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime, leading to the murder of Gaddafi, in-rushed the terrorists.
You got to know how Hillary and Obama set up the Arab Spring a couple years into their administration. And you got to know how they had a different group in Saudi Arabia that they had an alliance with that was running the Wahhabist terror systems that you know as Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and then, of course, their state is Islamic State. And the fact that they were brought into Syria and brought into Libya and protected.
Out of that was, with our knowledge, sent arms to Syria to fund the terrorists who were attacking and trying to overthrow the Assad regime. Internally, events are taking a clear sectarian direction. The Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. The West, Gulf countries, and Turkey support the opposition, while China, Russia, and Iran support the regime. The opposition is the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda. We were supporting the terrorists, guys. AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, supported the Syrian opposition from the beginning. AQI conducted a number of operations in several Syrian cities under the name of Jaish al-Nusra, Victorious Army, one of its affiliates. AQI, through the spokesman of the Islamic State of Iraq, ISIS, declared the Syrian regime as a spearhead of what he is naming Jibha, calling on the Sunnis in Iraq, especially the tribes in the border regions, to wage war. We're supporting all of these guys. And what was going on is the Syrians were pulling back from the border. The Iraqi government was incapable of policing the border. And there was this no man's land in which a vacuum into which the terrorists were flowing into. Out of Benghazi, out of Libya, in Iraq, and obviously mobilizing the terrorist movements in Syria as well, with the support of the Obama administration, the West.
What are we doing triggering an Arab Spring, trying to overthrow Syria, having Benghazi staged to resupply weapons out of Libya to Syria, overthrowing our allies in places like Egypt, staging an Arab Spring to bring down Europe?
The terrorist mess and the Russia footprint in Syria, the Iranian increased footprint in Syria, the rise of ISIS, all foreseen by this document, uncovered by Judicial Watch. That's the truth about Syria.
And so the strategic plan was to fire up and create Islamic resistance movements worldwide that could then be turned against the secular Arab governments to overthrow them.
Radical Islam is used. We, the United States, used radical Islam. We begged the Saudis to put the money in. They did.
Now, Michael Hayden, General Hayden, ran the National Security Agency, later ran the CIA in the Bush administration. This is 2013. We were sorry that the Muslim Brotherhood leader Morsi was overthrown.
Now, the public didn't know what was going on, but our military did. They began 5 years ago, and Cy Hirsch has now broken this last year. We first broke it, but he confirmed it all.
Our Joint Chiefs decided some years ago, on the basis of intelligence reporting, that there really wasn't any option, that there really were no moderates. Although the White House keeps on talking about there are moderate groups in the opposition.
What would you say to those who argue that the United States should arm the opposition movement in Syria?
I think it's premature to take a decision to arm the opposition movement in Syria, because I would challenge anyone to clearly identify for me the opposition movement in Syria at this point.
After Libya fell, we began to funnel stuff that, in an earlier article, I called the rat line. A lot of arms from Libya into Turkey.
Let's not kid ourselves about some dumb strategic decisions that were made in the last 15 years. Libya is doubly stupid because we already saw what we did when we went into Iraq in the first place. We saw what occurred after we made a political decision to get out of Iraq in 2011 that really led to the rise of ISIS. And all of a sudden we go into Libya and we take out a guy who not a good guy, but he stopped his nuclear weapons program. He was taking members of Al-Qaeda as detainees that were Libyans. So, I mean, and all of a sudden we have a nation now that's another failed nation, and groups like Al-Qaeda, groups like ISIS are now forming up inside of Libya, and it's causing the mayhem inside of Europe. So this is about making smart, strategic decisions for what's in the best interest of the United States of America.
The Joint Chiefs decided, well, they can't convince the White House and the State Department with intelligence. They're just going to begin to do what they can do.
Dempsey, I had a discussion with. He was willing to go up against the President of the United States.
The oath of office is an oath to the Constitution, not to the president. What they did was, because they didn't want to go directly to Bashar Assad, because the president had ruled that, that would have been in direct violation. But we did know that the Germans in particular, the German intelligence service and the German high command, and get this, the Russians and the Israelis, all three had been in contact with Bashar Assad. We began to shovel stuff that we had about al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, ISIS. We began to shovel information not only about where they were, but what they were thinking, as much as we learned. And so we enabled Bashar's army, the Syrian army. That way they were sort of, as somebody in the article I wrote said, we're doing stuff military to military.
Hillary Clinton, Obama, Samantha Power, Susan Rice created the disaster they had in Libya.
We switched sides. We went from global war on terrorism to where we were providing arms to al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood, politically controlled militias in Libya.
We've had a military that went to war and combat, rightfully or wrongfully, who's come back and said, enough is enough.
Benghazi was the last straw. And the Russians kept publishing the satellite photos of the hundreds of trucks an hour lined up going into Turkey and said, we're going to blow that up. They started blowing it up, and Turkey flipped out and started, shooting down Russian aircraft. I mean, this is a circus, folks.
I don't think Martin Dempsey has gotten his full reward for what he really did.
I mean, do people get that? I mean, that is so epic. American military said, we're not going to do this, and quietly joined with Russia to stop the head choppers. That is so epic.
I believe the president has executed the game plan, the vision that he had when he said he was going to transform America. He has ensured our economics stay at 1 to 1.5%. without growth where we ought to be in 4 to 7%. So he has unilaterally disarmed us.
Now, when you want to take a country down, the first thing you do is weaken the military. And that's what sequestration was all about. So that you wind up with the smallest army since World War II, the smallest navy since not World War II, World War I.
He's talked about how he needs to, how we need to sort of relook our entire military structure and what we're doing with our military. Our military is actually at its weakest point in many, many decades, as he laid out today.
Our resources are totally overextended. President Obama has weakened our military by weakening our economy. He's crippled us with wasteful spending, massive debt, low growth, a huge trade deficit, and open borders. Ending the theft of American jobs will give us resources we need to rebuild our military, which has to happen.
We will not be depleted. We will not happen again. It will not be allowed to happen again, where our military is depleted.
Now, there's no question. We got a hell of a job ahead of us. With the Muslim Brotherhood, penetration in every one of our national security agencies, including all our intelligence agencies.
Like the president during his childhood years in Jakarta, I came to see Islam, not how it is often misrepresented, but for what it is, how it is practiced every day by well over 1 billion Muslims worldwide, a faith of peace and tolerance and great diversity.
The Muslim Brotherhood is prominent in what's going on now in Egypt and elsewhere in the Mideast. The term Muslim Brotherhood is an umbrella term for a variety of movements. In the case of Egypt, a very heterogeneous group, largely secular, which has eschewed violence.
General Dempsey, General Odierno, General Mattis, and General Zinni all have one thing in common. They've all directly and indirectly questioned the president's battle plan. Are you one to question?
Absolutely. We are facing a crisis where military leaders know something is going to happen, but they have their responsibility for civilian leadership and authority, control of the military. But that is starting to run into the Constitution because each one of these generals and admirals have sworn to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. If you have a civilian military authority that lets things happen, like in Benghazi, and the president then went off to Las Vegas for a fundraiser. We have a constitution that we must uphold. If you have an administration that turns out is aiding and abetting the enemy, that's a very serious charge.
These people are bad people. They've done things. What they've done to General Flynn and to other people is a disgrace. It's treason.
Lieutenant General Flynn, who served as the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency from 2012 to 2014, said it's all political with the CIA's leadership.
To have somebody as your national security advisor who's accusing the CIA, who, as I said yesterday, is the organization that's on the tip of the spear in the fight against terrorism every day. Accuse him of lying?
Let me explain something. The most lethal organization, bar none, is and has been the CIA. Why can I say that? Because for 30 years, the CIA has wanted me to join them, and I said, go to hell.
CIA has, quote, lost sight of who they actually work for. They work for the American people. They've really been lying to the American public, he said, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Richard, how in the hell do you have a guy in that position accusing the CIA of lying?
Such a joke coming from the agency that is trained to lie.
When you look at the White House, you look at Obama and his team, they're constantly dealing in politics.
2 minutes
I don't like Assad at all, but Assad is killing ISIS. Russia is killing ISIS.
Well, of course, I can't respond to that. Mr. Trump can say whatever he wants to say, but the fact is that we are now seeing an unleashing of Russian air power.
I think it would be great if we got along with Russia because we could fight ISIS together, as an example, but I don't know Putin.
There is a determined effort by the Russian Air Force to eliminate the last of the Syrian rebels who were really holding out against the Assad regime.
She wants to fight for rebels. There's only one problem. You don't even know who the rebels are.
Mr. Trump,
So what's the purpose?
So they're wanting ISIS to grow, thinking that they're going to be the proxy army of the U.S. to complete their job, their agenda of regime change there in Syria.
When I was Secretary of State, advocated, and I advocate today, a no-fly zone.
For us to control all of the airspace in Syria would require us to go to war against Syria and Russia. That's a pretty fundamental decision that certainly I'm not going to make.
To impose a no-fly zone.
Chairman, could I for a second just answer?
No, Senator Gillibrand, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I do think
what Senator asked me was to control all of the airspace.
No, what he asked was, should we have a no-fly zone so we can protect these people from being slaughtered? That's what he's talking about.
I answered that first.
That's what we're all talking about.
Would you shoot down those Russian planes?
I might do what we did in Afghanistan many years ago to give those guys the ability to shoot down those planes. That equipment is available.
Most of the arms that we've given the so-called moderate rebels have wound up in the hands of ISIS because ISIS simply takes it from them, or it is given to them, and we mistakenly actually end up giving it to some radicals. Look, things are very...
Has Rand Paul ever been to Syria? Has he ever met with ISIS? Has he ever met with any of these people? No. We're going to have a fight because it's patently false. This is the same Rand Paul that said we didn't want to have anything to do with anything to do in the Middle East, by the way. I don't want to get in a fight with him at all. Yeah. But it's not true. I know these people. I'm in contact with them all the time.
All right, let me ask you this.
Are you supposed to trust your judgment if you're photographed with known terrorists?
I have never had anything to do with known terrorists, and I'm offended by your question.
But are we supposed to just look the other way, Mr. McCain? When you're pictured meeting with the likes of Abdel Hakim Belhaj, who is now the leader of ISIS forces in Libya. Belhaj, who implemented the brutality of Sharia law in Libya and worked directly with U.S. and NATO forces during the overthrow of Gaddafi.
It's been widely reported that for years now, the CIA was providing arms, intelligence, money, and other types of support to these armed militants who were working hand in hand and who are working hand in hand, and oftentimes under the command of Al-Qaeda.
The tactics that created the stay-behinds in the first place are still in place and continue to be used today. They are standard operating procedure. The people who pay the primary price for this are ordinary men and women globally.
The post-war fear of communism had created a secret army with deadly consequences. As wars are conducted against the new enemies of the West, can we believe that the lessons of the stay-behind armies have been learnt?
We and the intelligence community and others had helped to bring Trump to the forefront.
Knowing fully well that we could no longer have civilians who had no military experience, had no war experience, and our military was overturned by incompetent civilians.
We've been at war 15 years. We need someone to get in there and solve this war and close it down and defeat radical Islam. If we listened to Kristen Hildebrand, we'd be at war for 100 years. We need people that know how to win wars and end them, who can deter and dissuade enemies. And that's why I believe President Trump, President-elect Trump, is sending the right signal to the world.
The war in Iraq, we spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We don't even have it. Iran is taking over Iraq with the second largest oil reserves in the world. Obviously, it was a mistake.
The military began to understand that when they were in Iraq, they were being used.
Saw the open borders, saw globalism, saw what Merkel was doing, and said we finally are going to find our soul again, just like they did 5 years ago, refusing to back the Arab Spring.
We could no longer afford 30 years worth of incompetency, starting with Bill Clinton, going through Bush, Bush Jr., Bush Sr., and Jeb, who wanted to run.
Did Mr. Trump elaborate at all on how, under a Trump administration, he would destroy ISIS? Not with too much specificity, Jake.
He said, I have a great plan, it's going to be great. Well, what is it? I'd rather not say I want to be unpredictable.
She's telling us how to fight ISIS. Just go to her website. She tells you how to fight ISIS on her website. I don't think General Douglas MacArthur would like that too much.
The next segment, we're continuing the subject.
Well, at least I have a plan to fight ISIS.
No, you're telling the enemy everything you want to do.
But you say we're going to defeat ISIS, and Mr. Trump says we're going to defeat ISIS. What is President Trump going to do that the military isn't already trying to do?
The situation with ISIS has to be dealt firmly and strongly. When you have people being beheaded, I would love not to be over there. That's not our fight. That's other people's fights. That's revolutions. That's whatever you want to call it. Religious wars. I would do things that would be so tough that I don't even know if they'd be around to come to the table.
What sort of things, though?
I would take away their wealth. I would take away the oil.
But wouldn't you be destroying the wealth of Iraq?
No, there is no Iraq. There is no Iraq. Their leaders are corrupt. Excuse me, there are no Iraqis. They're broken up into so many different factions in Iraq.
You don't think bombing Iraqi oil fields, which are now in the control of ISIS, but bombing Iraqi oil fields is going to anger huge numbers of people?
I would bomb the hell out of those oil fields. I wouldn't send many troops because you won't need them by the time I got finished. You put a ring around them. You put a ring. You've just taken all of the wealth away. This is what should be done. But no politician's going to do that.
First and foremost, he's going to get with the military. He's going to give them complete support and give them the leadership to move in this direction. We have not moved sufficiently and decisively enough to defeat ISIS.
George C. Marshall to Dwight D. Eisenhower before the invasion of Normandy, his guidance to him was invade the continent of Europe and defeat the Axis powers. That's all you need to do. The generals will figure it out. I think what's happened is we haven't had good guidance come down.
Barack Obama was never focused on winning the war. He used our military as a social experiment, as a laboratory for his social experiments. And the military readiness was not his focus, and winning was not his focus.
I think what is true is that this has always been a multi-year project, precisely because the governance structures in the Sunni areas of Iraq are weak, and there are none in Syria, and we don't have ground forces there in sufficient numbers to simply march into al-Raqqa in Syria and clean the whole place out. And as a consequence, we've always understood that our goal has to be militarily constraining ISIL's capabilities.
Last year, I also pledged that we would work with our allies to extinguish ISIS from the face of the earth. 1 year later, I am proud to report that the coalition to defeat ISIS has liberated very close to 100% of the territory just recently held by these killers in Iraq and in Syria and in other locations as well. ISIS never thought this would happen. They never got hit like this. We took off the gloves.
So what he's done is he's allowed our military commanders to call the shots, and he's given them the authorities and the rules of engagement to be victorious, and they have been.
On the front page of the New York Times, Pulitzer Prize winner Mark Mazzetti reports that Saudi Arabia has told the U.S. government that it will sell off hundreds of billions of dollars worth of American assets held by the kingdom if our Congress passes a bill that would allow the Saudi government to be held responsible for the attacks on September 11th.
And Trump goes into Saudi Arabia, tells them, I'm going to take you out.
They said, King, we're protecting you. You might not be there for 2 weeks without us.
And boom, the funding gets cut off.
You're not going to deal effectively with this threat unless you understand what the source of it is. It's not just the zealousness of radical Islam. It's fed and fueled by the geostrategic ambitions of powers in the region.
It's a choice between two futures. A better future is only possible if your nations drive out the terrorists and drive out the extremists. Drive them out. Drive them out of this earth. With God's help, this summit will mark the beginning of the end for those who practice terror. Drive out the terrorists and drive out the extremists. Drive them out. Drive them out of your places of worship. Drive them out of your communities. Drive them out of your holy land. And drive them out of this earth. If you choose the path of terror, your life will be empty. Your life will be brief.
We were not like this in the past. We only want to go back to what we were, the moderate Islam that is open to the world, open to all the religions.
That's what she's referring to, the Khomeini rule in 1979. Yeah. He says, look, we want to live normal lives, the way we were living lives before 1979.
The first task in this joint effort is for your nations to deny all territory to the foot soldiers of evil. We must also strip them of their access to funds.
It was a long time coming, but tonight we are getting a chance to go over a chapter of history that has been secret up until now. It took years to get 28 pages of a congressional report released.
In one of those redacted sections of the 28 pages are the transfer of some $130,000 from then Saudi Ambassador Prince Bandar's family checking account to one of the hijackers' Saudi handlers in San Diego.
Some of the September 11th hijackers were in contact with and received support or assistance from individuals who may be connected to the Saudi government. Joint inquiry officials also commented that the CIA and FBI's failure to address the Saudi issue was unacceptable.
Pakistani chief and spy general Mahood Ahmad wired $100,000 to Muhammad Atta, the lead hijacker. Source, Washington Post, New York Times, you name it.
President Trump's first tweet, by the way, of 2018 has sparked tension between the U.S. and its ally, Pakistan. Trump tweeted, quote, "The United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they've given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools. They give safe haven to the terrorists we hunt in Afghanistan with little help no more. The White House noted yesterday that it intends to continue to withhold $225 million in aid to Pakistan, already appropriated by Congress. That aid has been on hold since August.
We have been paying Pakistan billions and billions of dollars. At the same time, they are housing the very terrorists that we are fighting. But that will have to change.
We get a report from CBS News as to where bin Laden was the night before the 9/11 attacks. He was in a Pakistani military hospital in Rawalpindi.
Pakistan intelligence sources tell CBS News that bin Laden was spirited into this military hospital in Rawalpindi.
The ISI was getting out of control, was no longer under military or civilian control in Pakistan, and was beginning to form their own so-called groups, or we call terrorist groups.
What we do know is this general, this Pakistani spy chief, is here in the United States after he wires $100,000 to the so-called head hijacker, Mohammed Atta.
We must cut off the financial channels that let ISIS sell oil, let extremists pay their fighters, and help terrorists smuggle their reinforcements.
Do you know any major Arab ally that embraces ISIL?
I know major Arab allies who fund them.
All the Sunni powers were using them. They created a Frankenstein. States have created this, and there are allies.
We had the meeting directly with President Trump, between him and His Highness the Emir, and he told us clearly, we found that there are some allegations about different countries in the region funding terrorism, and we saw some of them is around Qatar and Saudi.
Newly declassified information from a U.S. report on the 9/11 attacks have revealed links between al-Qaeda operatives and former Saudi ambassador to the U.S. Prince Bandar bin Sultan.
There's an early 2014 email from Hillary Clinton to her campaign manager, John Podesta. That email, it states that ISIS, is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
We told them very, very clearly, if there is any allegation, we can sit on the table and we can sort it out.
Everyone is scared to death of Donald Trump because Donald Trump plays chess in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He has now checkmated all of his potential opponents, his competitors. So clearly, he's a dangerous man. So I don't think we have to worry about losing respect.
Yeah. I am proud to announce that the nations here today will be signing an agreement to prevent the financing of terrorism. That means honestly confronting the crisis of Islamic extremism and the Islamicists and Islamic terror of all kinds.
Radical Islam is an ideology that won't go away by simply crushing them on the battlefield. We must face the fact that we are up against an ism, if you will, like we were against Nazism or communism, and now this is radical Islamism, and we must face that. We must clearly define it. We must get the Muslim world, those moderates that do exist behind this.
There can be no coexistence with this violence. There can be no tolerating it, no accepting it, no excusing it, and no ignoring it. The nations of the Middle East will have to decide what kind of future they want for themselves, for their country, and frankly, for their families and for their children.
Saudi sweep at least 11 princes, including prominent billionaire investor Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, are now under arrest in Saudi Arabia. The arrests were carried out by the powerful new anti-corruption committee headed by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the future king.
It's being carried out under the pretext of fighting corruption, as you said. That's the official line coming out. The 32-year-old bin Salman has made public statements about not only fighting terrorism, but also modernizing Saudi Arabia and tackling corruption. And the Trump administration counts him as a valuable ally. Among those princes, military officers, and top officials that were arrested in the last 24 hours, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, somebody who has publicly feuded with President Trump, and President Trump has accused him of trying to buy U.S. politicians.
With God's help, this summit will mark the beginning of the end for those who practice terror and spread its vile creed.
During a military graduation speech in May 2017, Sheikh Tamim was quoted making several comments that favored the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and Iran. 6 Arab countries, led by the Saudis, suspended diplomatic relations with Qatar and accused the energy-rich state of sponsoring terrorism. Some of the involved nations have already issued travel bans to Qatar. The other Gulf states banned Al Jazeera, made additional accusations, and announced their intent to suspend relations with Qatar. The course of action was later on joined by respective allies such as Egypt, Bahrain. As soon as the decision was announced, Saudi security forces blocked the entrance to Qatar's land border, and in addition to the blockade, Emirate Airlines, Gulf Air, Fly Dubai, Etihad Airways cancelled flights to Doha.
We know what's happened in the Middle East, and it has not been a pretty picture for the United States or for anybody. And a lot of things are changing, and they're changing very rapidly. As you know, ISIS is now, we've recaptured almost 100% of the territory, and that's really coming to an end in that part of the world. It's coming to an end.
There can be no coexistence with this violence. There can be no tolerating it, no accepting it, no excusing it, and no ignoring it. This is a battle between barbaric criminals who seek to obliterate human life. This is a battle between good and evil.
You've got to get the Sunni Islamic states themselves, like Saudi Arabia, to speak out forcefully against ISIS and against their interpretation of it.
There will be no funding. We have a zero tolerance for the funding of terrorists, and we're working very hard. And I will say that Saudi Arabia has been working very hard on that.
لأنه في السنوات الماضية كان الإرهاب يعمل في جميع دولنا وأغلب هذه المنظمات تعمل. اليوم هذا الشيء انتهى بوجود هذا التحالف فيحصل اليوم وكل دولة نستذكر بشكل دوري وشكل في الدول الإسلامية وفي جميع دول العالم بأن اليوم بدأت ملاحقة الإرهاب واليوم نرى هذه دول العالم خصوصا في الدول الإسلامية واليوم سوف نؤكد أن سوف نكون نحن من الحق وراء.
Our friends will never question our support, and our enemies will never doubt our determination.
In 1 year, we did more damage to ISIS than other administration, a certain other administration did in many years. But there is much more work to be done.
Justice Department officials objected to sending a plane loaded with cash to Tehran. Their objections were overruled by the State Department.
It was illegal. The regime laundered $400 million.
Secretary Kerry admits that some of the sanctions relief money will likely get to the hands of terrorists.
We could be funding terror. Today, Secretary of State John Kerry admitting that some of the billions of dollars in sanctions relief granted to Iran under that nuclear deal will end up in the hands of terrorists.
I think that some of it will end up in the hands of the IRGC or of other entities, some of which are labeled terrorists.
It is possible, and in fact we should expect that some portion of that money would go to the Iranian military and could potentially be used for the kinds of bad behavior that we have seen in the region up until now.
Never forget that Bill Clinton helped enable the transfer of nuclear technology to North Korea. So this is a pattern. But until now, I think no one has connected the dots on this pattern of Obama transferring technology, military secrets, as well as laundering money and gold, up to $33.6 billion in cash and gold. We have Obama bypassing all of the regulatory restrictions and electronic transfer restrictions that were in place globally. Obama could not transfer money to Iran through the existing systems. He had to launder the money like a drug dealer, like a criminal. And by doing so, he was able to bypass all of the scrutiny. Now, think about this, Alex. Can you imagine if Donald Trump laundered $33 billion in money and gold and gave it to anybody? He would be called a traitor. He would be called a treasonous actor.
I mean, he violated a bunch of federal international law doing this, and then you've got him funding the Arab Spring.
If a private company had done this is called money laundering. The CEO would be in jail right now.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. This disastrous deal gave this regime many billions of dollars, some of it in actual cash. A great embarrassment to me as a citizen and to all citizens of the United States.
They have armed militias, the Lebanese Hezbollah, now Kataib Hezbollah, and militias in Iraq.
In the years since the deal was reached, Iran's military budget grew nearly 40%. The dictatorship used the funds to build nuclear-capable missiles, increase internal repression, finance terrorism, and fund havoc and slaughter in Syria and Yemen.
The military told him exactly what we were saying. You take one off, this is what you need to do. You don't need to go after the militias. You don't have to go after Hezbollah.
This is really big strategic thinking. And it's not about just going and killing another terrorist in a place called Syria.
In the past, previous administrations had allowed Shia militias to take shots at us, and at best, we responded in theater, trying to challenge and attack everybody who was running around with an AK-47 or a piece of indirect artillery. We've made a very different approach. We've told the Iranian regime enough. You can't get away with using proxy forces and think your homeland will be safe and secure. We're going to respond against the actual decision makers, the people who are causing this threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
We took action last night to stop a war.
Trump is trying to stabilize this entire region.
We did not take action to start a war.
Qasem Soleimani was your adversary when you were running
and a
CENTCOM.
very, very capable one.
What was your thought when you heard he'd been killed? The first thought?
Well, it was a surprise. The question is now, what will Iran do? Will they dare to respond directly with Iranian missiles against our forces?
The president's decision may add to an already dangerous and difficult situation in the Middle East. This action may well have brought our nation closer to another endless war.
The question is why the administration chose this moment, why this administration made the decision to remove him from the battlefield when other administrations, both parties, decided that would escalate the risks, not reduce them.
This morning, we could be on the brink of a new kind of major conflict in the Middle East. I hope the administration, I pray the administration has thought through the second and third order consequences of what they have chosen. American lives and global stability are at risk.
This is a dangerous escalation.
When you think about what this president did, it is not clear to me, and I have a lot of questions and concerns about did he think about the repercussions of what this is going to mean.
And the reckless disregard for the consequences that would surely follow was, in my view, dangerously incompetent.
I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world.
I'm sure that the equivalent of the National Security Council in Iran is working very hard to do all the calculation and to determine what would the U.S. response be, having seen that the U.S. is willing to take a very significant action. I mean, it's impossible to overstate the significance of the attack that takes out Qasem Soleimani and the number 2 militia leader in Iraq as well. This is bigger than bin Laden. It's bigger than Baghdadi. This is the equivalent in U.S. terms of the CIA director, CENTCOM commander, JSOC commander, and presidential envoy for the region for Iran, in the most powerful figure in Iran for the solidification of the Shia crescent and also the operational commander of the actions that they were pursuing.
He should have been terminated long ago. Nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over.
Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013.
General Soleimani, the head of the Al-Quds forces, has more blood of American service members on his hands than any living terrorist. Under this agreement, the sanctions on General Soleimani are lifted.
And they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq.
Remember where we came in. In 2015, the Obama-Biden administration essentially handed power to the Iranian leadership and acted as a quasi-ally of theirs by underwriting the very militias that killed Americans. Those resources, the money that they had to build out those forces throughout the Shia Crescent was provided to them by the nuclear deal.
He trained terrorist armies, including Hezbollah, launching terrorist strikes against civilian targets. He fueled bloody civil wars all across the region. He viciously wounded and murdered thousands of U.S. troops, including the planting of roadside bombs.
Iran now is in desperate economic shape. She can no longer tolerate the economic abuse that has occurred because of the IRG and Soleimani.
But I think the real question for the United States is, will there be a diplomatic initiative that says, okay, look, this is not headed in a good direction. We truly do want to de-escalate.
Basically, taking out Soleimani made Khamenei more amenable to any prescriptions we might give him in terms of what type of peace we would want. We take out an individual, we take out a country, and then we come back and negotiate. This was true about all of the people that I've dealt with, whether it was in Panama, Italy, or Cambodia, and then we turn around and I negotiate a treaty.
Within the first 100 days when I was brought into the Reagan administration, the architectural plans that I developed and the implementation was effective in taking down the Soviet Union. It just didn't come down. It wasn't given to us. I infiltrated those places. You get into them, and then you neutralize them by ways that are very, old method.
Let me give you an example. When I went down to Panama, and my mission was to take out Noriega. I started blowing up things. I started agitprop. I started fires. He brought in his own people.
He hunted me down, accused me of being an assassin, whether it's right or wrong. Let's not worry about that.
I had a wonderful dinner with him for 3 to 4 hours. We talked about everything, and eventually he was taken out.
I was brought in to create peace in Cambodia and disarm the Khmer Rouge. I was involved in Camp David, maintaining peace between Israel and Egypt.
That's what Trump will do.
We must all work together toward making a deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place.
The Iranians were delivering under the nuclear deal some 3 million barrels a day and getting rich. The very Shia militias, the bullets they're using, the pay that the soldiers are getting, that are putting Americans at risk are a direct result of that bad nuclear deal. The fact that the Europeans were permitted to trade, that the fact that America provided billions in cash to the Ayatollah, that's precisely what President Trump came into office having to face. We're pushing back against it. It is the case today that fewer than 500,000 barrels a day are being delivered out of Iran. We've crippled their economy. They've never been in this position, Maria. Iran has never been in a place where they've been challenged, not only economically, but diplomatically, with a global coalition that in May of last year put out a united statement against Iran. This is a challenge and a strategy that President Trump has laid out that we're executing with great vigor.
Iran must abandon its nuclear ambitions and end its support for terrorism. Iran can be a great country. Peace and stability cannot prevail in the Middle East as long as Iran continues to foment violence, unrest, hatred, and war.
Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner says that the Obama administration approached her, and she and her administration met with Gary Samore, and they were told to provide nuclear fuel to Iran by the Obama administration officials. This was part of the Iran nuclear deal. Russia was also, through Uranium One, getting nuclear fuel from U.S. mining companies, and that deal was enabled by none other than Robert Mueller, Hillary Clinton, and
who also met
Obama.
secretly on the tarmac, giving the Russians a sample. I mean, you cannot make this up. This is why they started saying Russia, Russia, Russia during the campaign, because they knew they had been selling out in this big secret deal. And so they knew Trump was coming for him on this like he is. Yes. And that's why they put this whole smokescreen up.
It's treason.
Last night at 11 o'clock, the White House announced that U.S. forces will withdraw from Syria, and then Turkey will take up the operation against ISIS.
We defeated this group largely, defeated ISIS, 100% of the caliphate, 100%. And we wanted to do 100%. When do we get out? There's going to be a time we get out. We have to bring our people back home. And frankly, our great soldiers, I've been talking about this on the campaign. You go back 3 years ago and more, and you watch the speeches. We want to bring our soldiers back home. These are the endless wars. And we're not fighting, we're policing to a large extent. We're policing in certain areas. We're not police, these are fighters, great fighters, the greatest in the world, and that's what they do.
We need to go back to where this all began for the Trump administration. It began with a situation in Syria where the previous president had drawn a red line and failed to enforce it. It began with 4 million people internally displaced, or even as many as 6 million people, 500,000 people killed. This administration came in when ISIS was on the rise. You remember, George, there were people in cages, heads being cut off. This administration came in and worked seriously alongside the SDF forces and our allies as well to build out a counter-ISIS coalition to take down that caliphate. Now the president believes we've accomplished a significant part of our mission, and he wants our folks to come home.
We were down to very few soldiers in Syria. We had 50 in the region that you're talking about, 50 soldiers, and they've been already moved out. So I've told President Erdogan, I hope he's going to treat everybody with great respect. You have to understand, they've been fighting various of the people that we were working with, and Turkey's been fighting them for many years. Somebody said hundreds of years.
We created ISIS. ISIS was created under Obama, Brennan, Clinton. ISIS was the artifact of the invasion of Iraq, which was a disaster thanks to John Bolton, Zalmay Khalilzad, the neocons. And as a result of that, the Iranians came out as winners. And in turn, we had a Kurdistan in the north of Iraq. Barzani runs that. As a result, ISIS went into Syria. It was totally composed of Turkish soldiers who allowed the ISIS and Al-Qaeda people to come right through Turkey. We funded it, and at the same time we funded a counterinsurgency against ISIS. So we're in the business of making war against ourselves. War is not a very good business. Even Eisenhower said, beware the military-industrial complex.
It's got tremendous power. They like fighting. They make a lot of money when they fight.
And what is war good for? Absolutely nothing.
We've been in Syria for many years. You know, Syria was supposed to be a short-term hit, just a very short-term hit, and we were supposed to be in and out. We want to bring our troops back home.
Do leave Syria. We do not need to be in Syria.
8 long years after President Obama's ill-fated push at regime change, U.S. troops are still on the ground in Syria. More than 500,000 people are dead, hundreds of thousands are terribly injured, and millions more Syrians are displaced. It really is a nightmare of misery. We're talking about sand and death. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, vast wealth. We're talking about sand and death. Across the Middle East, we have seen anguish on a colossal scale. We have spent $8 trillion on wars in the Middle East, never really wanting to win those wars.
Once again, after the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the Iraq War, all the wars that we've been in so far, we lost them. Nevertheless, the chicken hawks, the neocons, Bush Jr., Cheney, Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and a whole slew of them lied to the American public. Worse than anything else, our generals lied to us.
We're getting a little tired of the woke generals that we have, right? Do you think that General Patton was woke? I don't think so. What do you think, Mike? Mike, was he woke? I don't think so. I don't think he was too woke. He was the exact opposite. You know what woke means? It means you're a loser. Everything woke. Everything woke. It's true. Everything woke turns to shit, okay? It's true. Look at what's happening.
And now we come to that moment of truth. You want to impeach presidents, then impeach the presidents who brought us to war and lied on that behalf. Bush, Cheney, Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Kerry. These are the people that you want to impeach because they caused disasters, they lied, and it was treasonous. It wasn't just one president, it was a series of presidents who came around and said, no, we need to be in Afghanistan.
We must recognize the strategic importance of Afghanistan as a stepping stone to possible control over much of the world's oil supplies.
The U.S. government, across multiple administrations, officials deliberately misled the public about what exactly was going on.
According to more than 2,000 pages of documents obtained by the Washington Post, military commanders, diplomats, and aid workers privately and in blunt terms describe an unclear mission, a failed strategy, and efforts to sway public opinion. Among the revelations, retired General Douglas Lute, the Afghan war czar under Presidents Bush and Obama, saying in 2015, "What are we trying to do here? We didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking."
We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We did not know what we were doing. What are we trying to do here?
What was being told to the public was completely at odds with reality on the ground.
We have made remarkable progress.
We're not losing a war out here by any means.
We are prevailing.
They knew the war had been unwinnable. There were literally commanding generals saying we had no strategy, not just a bad strategy, we had no strategy at all. There was no real consensus on what the United States was trying to achieve.
Routing out the Taliban was important, but building a school is equally important.
From democracy to women's rights to infrastructure to education.
Year after year, U.S. officials failed to tell the public the truth about the war in Afghanistan.
We will defeat the enemy and win the war on terror.
Afghans will take full responsibility.
Past 8 months have seen important but hard-fought progress in Afghanistan.
An unnamed national security official told interviewers in 2016 the metrics were always manipulated for the duration of the war.
There's a 20-year war. The first 2 years, I called it righteous. We went in there for the right reasons. Get al-Qaeda, get bin Laden. But the next 18 years, we forgot who we were as a military, which is to fight our nation's wars, deter if necessary, then fight and win. And we started going to nation building, and we went for 18 years of this, building an army in Afghanistan. There's a lot of culpability out there for a lot of former senior officers at the 4-star rank and the 3-star rank that got us to where we're at. It was all wrong, and we shouldn't have been involved in nation building in Afghanistan. We should have done the job that we were sent to do and then get out and then leave Afghanistan to Afghans. Look, Alexander the Great saw that in 327 BC.
When I was in the Pentagon, the only thing I could find out was there was an intention to stay indefinitely. Lots of people were benefiting, not the American people and certainly not our soldiers and Marines.
Look, start out with this limited mission. You go in, but the minute that the military-industrial complex gets
a lot of money.
one finger hold on a country, on a place, on an engagement like Afghanistan, you will never get out because people are making so much money, hand over fist in these conflicts. And once that money machine starts, forget about it.
It is a story about money, and it's a story about greed and corruption.
You have these toxic senior military leaders. Toxic because they simply don't tell the truth. And for 20 years, they have been lying, frankly, to the American people. We said we were going to fight terrorism. As you pointed out, that was over quite quickly. There was no reason to make war on the Taliban, had no role in 9/11. And what have we created? Chaos. What have we established that's in the interest of the American people? Nothing.
And hopefully Trump will learn this lesson and state the truth as he had in the past. Get out of Afghanistan, get out of Syria, get out of Iraq.
We have been very good about winning, today, but screwing tactically, but screwing up the strategic victory without thinking how we can sustain that. And I think that's where Mr. Trump is at. It's really this strategic sort of day after, what are we going to do, and being laser focused on achieving that goal.
Since the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, we've lacked a coherent foreign policy. One day we're bombing Libya and getting rid of a dictator to foster democracy. for civilians. The next day, we're watching the same civilians suffer while that country falls and absolutely falls apart. The legacy of the Obama-Clinton interventions will be weakness, confusion, and disarray. After all that money was spent and all those lives lost, the young men and women gravely wounded so many, the Middle East is less safe, less stable, and less secure than before these conflicts began. The same people pushing for these wars are often the ones demanding America open its doors to unlimited migration from war-torn regions, importing the terrorism and the threat of terrorism right to our own shores. But not anymore. My administration understands that immigration security is national security.
We spent a fortune in that war. We spent a fortune to get the Kurds on our side. Now it's time for the Europeans, Russia, Iran, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, the Saudi Arabians, and Israelis to handle this problem because that's their regional concern. It's not our concern.
Now, the Kurds, it's very interesting. Turkey doesn't like them, other people do. I didn't like the fact that they're selling the small oil that they have to Iran, and we asked them not to sell it to Iran. But the Kurds, our partners, are selling oil to Iran. We're not thrilled about that, okay? I'm not happy about it at all. At the same time, they fight better when we fight with them. You know, when we send 30 F-18s in front of them, they fight much better than they do when we don't. And you've seen what's happened. But we want to protect the Kurds, nevertheless. We want to protect the Kurds, but I don't want to be in Syria forever. It's sand, and it's death.
The terrorist mess and the Russia footprint in Syria, the Iranian increased footprint in Syria, the rise of ISIS, all foreseen by this document, uncovered by Judicial Watch. So everyone attacking Trump and was convinced to continue the Syrian campaign that was started illicitly by Obama and Clinton as they played games in nation building and regime change in the Middle East. That's the truth about Syria. So if you don't like the results of what's happening today, blame Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. That's what this document shows. That's what's happening in Syria, and Trump's taking it on the chin for getting out of that morass.
So we're killing. And then I read when we pull out, oh, Russia's thrilled. Russia's not happy. You know why they're not happy?
Russia's economic forecast for 2019 is down to 1% growth if they're lucky. Mr. Putin has now been stuck with the red pill of all time. He's got about 5,000 men on the ground. He's got some aircraft and a few ships. He's standing in the path of the most powerful armed forces in the Middle East and the second largest armed forces in NATO. That's not a happy place to be. The president has done something that I have not witnessed in the last 30 years. He's actually injecting strategy back into American foreign and defense policy.
This is about our nation. So we have a 5-day ceasefire. During that 5 days, the Kurds and other people they're going to be taken great care of. They're going to be moving around, moving out of a safe zone, which is something that Turkey has always wanted. And we've gotten everything we could have ever dreamed of. And we're also going to be able to bring our people back home. But we'll be able to have control of ISIS total. And I want to thank everybody. And the other thing I want to thank, as a group, I want to thank the Kurds because they were incredibly happy with this solution. This is a solution that really, well, it saved their lives, frankly. It saved their lives. So we've done a great thing for our partner. If we didn't go this unconventional, tough love approach, you could have never gotten it done. They've been trying to do this for many, many years. You could have never gotten it done.
Let me explain. He's turned to Mr. Erdogan, who has been trying to carve out a portion of Syria now for a very long time. Remember, Mr. Erdogan is also partially responsible for standing up ISIS. Then ISIS turned out to be a Frankenstein's monster, and he decided it needed to be brought under control. Now he wants to resettle Sunni Arab refugees in northwestern Syria and create a kind of security zone for Turkish interests. But he's also simultaneously told Mr. Erdogan, you can do this, but now you are responsible for dealing with ISIS if ISIS rears its head. If it comes back, it's your problem. Now, this is a very important point. The president has shifted the burden of responsibility for something that is clearly regional, clearly goes back to Turkey, to Mr. Erdogan. At the same time, Russia has promised to maintain the territorial integrity of Syria, come what may. How is Russia going to deal with Mr. Erdogan, who has decided to carve out a piece of Syria for his own purposes? And then we have Iran. Iran wants to maintain its connectivity to Lebanon and its Shiite allies in that country. But with the Turks dominating northern Syria, Iran now is going to be unable, or at least will find it far, far more difficult to connect with Lebanon. The point is, the president has checkmated all of the key players in the region in Syria. Now they must confront each other for a change.
But wait a second, you're leaving out a key point, and the one that I've been hearing all day long on a loop on television, which is really our only allies in the world, the Kurds of Syria. What about them? Everybody on television basically spent 12 hours today in a kind of tribute to the Syrian Kurds.
Before we arrived, the Maoist communist Kurds in northern Syria, who have a long history and a close relationship with Moscow as a result, were always interested in allying themselves with anyone that would further their cause when their cause involves independence for themselves in Syria and also attacks against the Turks, whom they regard as enemies. In our absence, the Kurds now have to make a decision. Do we make a peace with Damascus, which is what the Russians have told them to do, which is what we have privately told them to do, which is what the Syrian government would like them to do? Or did the Kurds decide to take on the Turks independently? I rather think that the Syrian Kurds will decide that it's probably in their interest to side with Damascus.
The Kurds have no choice now but to throw in their lot with this man, Syria's leader, Bashar al-Assad.
So once we pull out, I think we'll see that happen. But here's something else. Israel benefits from this because Iran is now at loggerheads with Turkey. Iran is interested in connecting to Hezbollah. The Russians have no interest in turning Syria into a platform for attack against Israel. So the Russians and the Iranians, who are checkmated by the Turks, now the Turks and all three of these people have to deal with the reality that Israel and the United States are benefiting from our withdrawal.
I didn't know it was going to work out this quickly. I didn't know it would work out this well. Great day for the Kurds. It's really a great day for civilization.
All of these interventions always create unnatural balances of power. You end up supporting a small minority because they share short-term an interest with you. That's what's happened with the Kurds. Remember, they're communists in northern Syria. These are Maoists. They want to build their own state. They have been involved with a war against the Turks that's lasted almost 40 years and killed 55,000 people. So this is a life or death question for Mr. Erdogan. It isn't for us. And our mission there is over. We destroyed the ISIS caliphate.
Now, the Kurds are fighting for their land, just so you understand. They're fighting for their land. And as somebody wrote in a very, very powerful article today, they didn't help us in the Second World War. They didn't help us with Normandy, as an example. They mentioned names of different battles. They were there, but they're there to help us with their land. And that's a different thing. In addition to that, we have spent tremendous amounts of money. So when you say they're fighting with us, yes, but they're fighting for the land.
But primarily, the Kurds will serve whoever serves their interest. At that particular point in time, we had an interest to fight ISIS because we created ISIS.
It was time to bring our soldiers back home. So I see, and I will tell you, the hardest thing I have to do, by far, much harder than the witch hunt, is signing letters to parents of soldiers that have been killed. And it's not only that, in areas where there's not a lot of upside, if there's any upside at all, and in many cases there's only downside. And especially when that soldier was killed in a blue-on-green attack. You know what that is, right? That's where a soldier being trained or whatever turns his gun on an American soldier. Here, son, take your gun. You know how to use it. And he takes the gun and he turns it and he shoots one. We have many of them.
Our administration has already been in contact with Syrian Defense Forces, and we have already begun to facilitate their safe withdrawal from the nearly 20-mile wide safe zone area south of the Turkish border in Syria. Let me say this also includes an agreement by Turkey to engage in no military action against the community of Kobani. And in addition, the United States and Turkey have both mutually committed to a peaceful resolution and future for the safe zone.
I will tell you, on behalf of the United States, I want to thank Turkey. I want to thank all of the people that have gotten together and made this happen. This is an incredible outcome. So you have a 22-mile strip that for many, many years, Turkey, in all fairness, they've had a legitimate problem with it. They had terrorists, they had a lot of people in there that they couldn't have. They've suffered a lot of loss of lives also, and they had to have it cleaned out. But once you start that, it gets to be to a point where a tremendous amount of bad things can happen. So a process started, and we started to negotiate. And I think that obviously the sanctions and tariffs were going to be very biting. I'm glad we don't have to do it. We'll be taking them off very quickly as soon as this is finalized. But this is an incredible outcome. This outcome is something they've been trying to get for 10 years, everybody, and they couldn't get it. Other administrations, and they never would have been able to get it unless you went somewhat unconventional. I guess I'm an unconventional person.
The big thing for me is the oil fields. President Trump is thinking outside the box. I was so impressed with his thinking about the oil. Not only are we going to deny the oil fields falling into Iranian hands, I believe we're on the verge of a joint venture between us and the Syrian Democratic Forces who helped destroy ISIS and keep them destroyed to modernize the oil fields and make sure they get the revenue, not the Iranians, not Assad, and it can help pay for our small commitment in the future. And protecting Israel is the #1 objective. We can do all of that with a very small force.
Senator,
I'm increasingly optimistic this could turn out very well.
It could turn out very well. This is completely different than what you've been saying all week. You have been a staunch criticizer of the president's.
I am increasingly optimistic that we can have some historic solutions in Syria that have eluded us for years if we play our cards right.
I took a lot of heat from a lot of people, even some of the people in my own party, but they were there. In the end, they were there. They're all there. Look, this is about the nation. This isn't about Republicans or Democrats.
But I see a way forward now that really, quite frankly, is historic.
But we've been there for 10 years. We've been in the Middle East for 19 and a half years. So this was a great thing for everybody. And Turkey is, I really appreciate what they've done. They did the right thing. If you let this go, you would have lost millions of lives. Don't forget, your friend President Obama lost more than 500,000 lives in a very short period in the same region. We've lost very little. But without that gunfire going back and forth, without those rockets going in both directions, without other countries moving in and potentially moving in and creating virtually a world war, without all of that happening, you would have never been able to make this deal. We have tried, but everybody's tried to make this deal for 15 years.
President Trump declared victory for his foreign policy today, announcing that Turkey had agreed to make the 5-day-long ceasefire with Kurdish forces in Syria permanent.
As I greet you this morning from the White House to announce a major breakthrough toward achieving a better future for Syria and for the Middle East.
President Trump also lifted sanctions he imposed on Turkey, but added a permanent solution to the Turkish-Kurd conflict would not have been possible without the fighting that erupted. The president appeared to get buy-in from the Kurds. Syrian Democratic Forces leader General Mazloum tweeting, quote, "We thank President Trump for his tireless efforts that stopped the brutal Turkish attack and jihadist groups on our people."
I feel strongly. I have a bigger heart than anybody. We're going to build a safe zone. It's going to be in Syria.
President Trump is leaving it to Turkey and Russia to patrol the 20-mile safe zone established in the agreement.
And we're not going to allow people to come into our country who we have no idea who they are. We have no idea where they come from. They have no paperwork.
I think it's very important to recognize that that is not the only option that we have, is bringing these people here. We can create safe zones over there. And I think it actually makes a lot more sense.
They're young and they're strong. You look at that migration line. They're young, they're strong, they're powerful. And you say, why aren't they back fighting for their country?
These homesick brothers should go back to their countries, and we should work on this. Another important step for our operation is to establish this. The area that will be safe with our operation, first of all, we are going to repatriate 1 million Syrians, and after that, another 1 million will move back.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham praised the ceasefire.
This was an outcome created by us, the United States, and nobody else, no other nation. Very simple. And we're willing to take blame, and we're also willing to take credit. This is something they've been trying to do for many, many decades. Since then, others have come out to help, and we welcome them to do so. Everybody agreed to things that 3 days ago they would have never agreed to. That includes the Kurds. The Kurds are now much more inclined to do what has to be done. Turkey is much more inclined to do what has to be done. Turkey wouldn't have done this 3 days ago. The Kurds would not have done it 3 days ago. This is a situation where everybody is happy. And I'm happy because there's no fighting. We can bring certainly most of our people back home for the first time in many years. Other countries have stepped forward. They want to help, and we think that's great. The nations in the region must ultimately take on the responsibility of helping Turkey and Syria police their border.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Vladimir Putin met for hours and reached an agreement they called historic.
After a 6-hour meeting, Erdogan said Turkey, Russia, and the Syrian regime together would evict Kurdish fighters known as the YPG.
YPG terrorists and their arms will be taken further than 30 kilometers from the border. Their fortifications and positions will be destroyed. Turkish and Russian joint patrols will begin.
This operation, by removing threats posed by terrorists, guarantees Syria's territorial integrity and political unity.
Syria must be freed from illegal international military interference. The long-term stabilization of Syria in general can only be achieved, in our opinion, by observing Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
The Russians and Turks will patrol the northeast Syrian border zone together, having made sure it's purged of Kurdish fighters.
Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin called the agreement a permanent solution.
In my opinion, these decisions are very important, maybe even momentous, and will allow to resolve the situation.
President Trump gave away all of our leverage. He did that last December when he announced he wanted to leave Syria and that we were leaving Syria.
The same people that I watched and read giving me and the United States advice were the people that I have been watching and reading for many years. They are the ones that got us into the Middle East mess, but never had the vision or the courage to get us out. They just talk.
It was a betrayal of the strongest allies that we have in the region.
And now, having thrown the Kurds under the bus, he is making us weaker. This man has arrogated unto himself all authority out of complete and utter ignorance.
How many Americans must die in the Middle East in the midst of these ancient sectarian and tribal conflicts?
This is just a catastrophic outcome that he's trying to spin.
But it's clear that Trump's ignorance of U.S. national security interests as well as global affairs is just handing over to Vladimir Putin, and the removal of U.S. troops from that Syrian area with the Kurds is just the latest example of Donald Trump continuing to ignore what our responsibilities have been.
Everybody's miserable because he shoved a red pill down everybody's throat.
Explain that.
Listen to what he said. He says, first of all, we're not going to commit forces to fight anymore unless there's a vital strategic interest at stake. What a novel idea. That's a brilliant change strategically for this country. Secondly, he said, no more global policemen, no more regime change. Well, you just robbed half the population of downtown D.C.
One of the things I think we have to worry about is this president as commander-in-chief and what he's doing to this country. He is weakening this country, and he's essentially turning us into a second-class power.
It's another opportunity for the neocons, for the retired generals that come on TV who have all become millionaires as a result of these
Raytheon, they work for all the big companies,
all these guys,
consultants.
Please don't leave. We're spending
Keep
billions.
the money flow. Keep spending the money over there.
And they know from experience that once we do pull out, we don't go back.
He betrayed our allies. He's turned Syria over to Russia, given them a base of operations in Syria and in the Middle East, turned it over to Iran, which is one of our adversaries in that part of the world, and turned it over to Assad. And more importantly, he's allowed ISIS to be able to reorganize itself and be a threat to the United States. This is the most disastrous foreign policy blunder I've seen a president of the United States make.
Well, we're disappointing the Chinese because the Chinese were betting heavily that we would continue to spend trillions of dollars in these vast wastelands to achieve nothing. The Iranians are upset because now they think they're going to have to defend Iraq against the Turks. They've already warned the Turks not to advance any further. That means that Iran is split now in terms of its capabilities between the Persian Gulf.
Pressure will be taken off the remnants of ISIS.
This adds up to the fact that ISIS has been relieved of all the pressure that it was under.
After all of the precious blood and treasure America has poured into the deserts of the Middle East, I am committed to pursuing a different course, one that leads to victory for America.
A significant number of ISIS fighters have escaped, and right now we no longer have the people there who are keeping a lid on this problem, which is the U.S. Special Forces working with the Kurds.
We begin with the stunning headline that America woke up to. U.S. Special Forces in Syria taking down the ruthless leader of ISIS. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi founded the Islamic State and launched a global campaign of jihad.
Senator, you very recently said you thought that the president's decision to withdraw could be the biggest mistake of his presidency. Today, you're affirming it as a positive one.
What I'm saying today is that the killing of Baghdadi is a game changer in the war on terror. The president's determination over time has paid off. We don't give him enough credit for destroying the caliphate. He did this in months, not years, because he changed the rules of engagement.
The raid was also a strategic and political victory for the president. ABC's chief global affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz takes us inside the raid.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the world's most wanted and brutal terrorist, dead after a daring raid by the elite U.S. Delta Force.
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead.
5 p.m. Saturday night, President Trump, flanked by Vice President Pence, National Security Advisor O'Brien, and Defense Secretary Esper, gathering in the Situation Room with military brass, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
He died after running into a dead-end tunnel, whimpering and crying and screaming all the way.
But before the special operations team could get to him, Baghdadi detonated a suicide vest he was wearing. At 7:15 p.m., the call came into the Situation Room from those on the ground saying 100% confirmation. Jackpot. Over.
He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place. The thug who tried so hard to intimidate others spent his last moments in utter fear, in total panic and dread, terrified of the American forces bearing down on him. We were in the compound for approximately 2 hours, and after the mission was accomplished, we took highly sensitive material and information from the raid, much having to do with ISIS, origins, future plans, things that we very much want.
The president changed the rules of engagement. You think the caliphate destroyed itself? He made a conscious decision when he went to Iraq to change the game when it came to destroying ISIS. He's had a determination to destroy the caliphate unlike anybody I've ever met.
Capturing or killing Baghdadi has been the top national security priority of my administration.
Now the question is how to keep it down. I think we got a plan now to keep it down that meets his national security objectives of reducing our footprint, and securing the oil is a really smart idea, quite frankly. That's how ISIS survived for so long. If you can take Syrian oil out of the hands of ISIS, Iran, and other enemies, then that is a really transformational event in the Iraq-Syrian theater. And what I see developing in Syria is very promising.
The oil is, so valuable for many reasons. It fueled ISIS, number one. Number two, it helps the Kurds. But no, we're protecting the oil. We're securing the oil. Now, that doesn't mean we don't make a deal at some point. But I don't want to be, they're fighting for 1,000 years. They're fighting for centuries. I want to bring our soldiers back home. But I do want to secure the oil. If you read about the history of Donald Trump, I was a civilian. I had absolutely nothing to do with going into Iraq, and I was totally against it. But I always used to say, if they're going to go in, nobody cared that much, but it got written about. If they're going to go in, I'm sure you've heard the statement, because I met it more than any human being alive. If they're going into Iraq, keep the oil. They never did. I wasn't a fan of Iraq. I didn't want to go into Iraq. But I will tell you, when we were in, we got out wrong. And I always said, in addition to that, keep the oil. Now, I said it for economic reasons. But if you think about it, Mike, if we kept the oil, you probably wouldn't have ISIS, because that's where they made their money in the first place. So we should have kept the oil. But, okay. Maybe you'll have another chance. I know Lindsey Graham had a bill where basically we would have been paid back for all of the billions of dollars that we've spent. Many, many billions of dollars. I mean, I hate to say it, it's actually trillions of dollars, but many, many billions of dollars. And by one vote, they were unable to get that approved in the Senate. They had some pretty big opposition from people that shouldn't have opposed, like a president, and they weren't able. If you did that, Iraq would be a much different story today, because they would be owing us a lot of money. They would be treating us much differently. But I will say Iraq was very good with respect to the raid last night.
Here's the one thing that's been missing in the Mideast: skin in the game. If we had made our aid to Iraq alone, they would have probably acted differently than if it's just a grant. Now the SDF, who have been good partners, have a chance with our help to increase revenue for the benefit of their people. They'll have more incentive to fight harder. Everything changes when the people you're fighting with have skin in the game. And I want to compliment the president for coming up with a model in Syria that we probably should have done in Iraq. This is a game changer with the killing of Baghdadi. This is a moment where we should all be proud of our American military and our intelligence community. This is a moment where President Trump's worst critic should say, "Well done, Mr. President."
Remember one axiom: the business of foreign policy is business. In turn, we have to understand that we have no allies, we have no friends, we have national security interests.
I'll tell you who loves us being there: Russia and China. Because while they build their military, we're depleting our military there. So Russia loves us being there. Now, Russia likes us being there for two reasons: because we kill ISIS, we kill terrorists, and they're very close to Russia. We're 8,000 miles away. Now, maybe they can get here, but we've done very well with Homeland Security and the ban, which, by the way, is approved by the United States Supreme Court, as you know. And it's very hard for people to come to our country. But it's many thousands of miles away, whereas Russia's right there, Turkey's right there, Syria is there. They're all right there. Excuse me, Iran is right there, Iraq is right there. They all hate ISIS. So we don't, in theory, they should do something. And I'll give you something else. The European nations have been a tremendous disappointment. Because I personally called, but my people called a lot, take your ISIS fighters. And they didn't want them. They said, we don't want them. They came from France, they came from Germany, they came from the UK. They came from a lot of countries. And I actually said to him, you don't take them, I'm going to drop them right on your border. And you can have fun capturing them again. But the United States taxpayer is not going to pay for the next 50 years. You see what Guantanamo costs. We're not going to pay tens of billions of dollars because we were good enough to capture people that want to go back to Germany, France, UK, and other parts of Europe. And they can walk back. They can't walk to our country. We obliterated the ISIS caliphate 100%, killed its founder and leader, al-Baghdadi, and eliminated the world's top terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. We withdrew from the terrible Iran nuclear deal and imposed crippling sanctions on the world's leading state sponsor of terror.
We have peace in Syria. Trump did that.
In 3 short years, we built the greatest economy in history, and we are quickly doing it again. We revitalized the NATO alliance, where other countries are now paying a much more fair share. I believe that, when I look at the numbers in Germany and some other countries, they may not like Donald Trump, but you have to understand, that means I'm doing a good job because I'm representing the United States. Angela is representing Germany. She's doing a fantastic job. My predecessors did not do a very good job. We forged historic partnerships with Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to stop human smuggling. This month we achieved a peace deal between Serbia and Kosovo.
Iraq, we finished the war. Trump did that. We're going to finish the war in Afghanistan. We'll finish that. Trump did it.
We've been in the war in Afghanistan now for 19 years. We've substantially reduced the force, as you know. We're really acting more as a law enforcement agency than we are as a military, because we could win that very quickly and easily if I was willing to kill millions of people. I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to do that. We'd win that so quickly your head would spin. And I'm not talking about nuclear. So we are negotiating with the Taliban. We've been negotiating with them for a while. We will see what happens.
The U.S. and the Taliban signed an historic peace deal in Qatar. The agreement is aimed at ending years of U.S. blood and treasure being spilled in Afghanistan and allowing American forces to return home.
History was made today with the signing of a deal that could see an end to America's longest war, all of which depends on the Taliban keeping up its end of the bargain, a bargain that includes severing ties with al-Qaeda and opening up negotiations with other Afghan factions, including the U.S.-backed government, for a potential power-sharing agreement, all with the hopes it will lead to a lasting ceasefire.
We are seizing the best opportunity for peace in a generation. We recognize America shouldn't fight in perpetuity in the graveyard of empires if we can help Afghans forge peace. And we have respect. We believe that the Afghan people are ready to chart their own course forward. Very importantly, the U.S.-Taliban agreement entails a promise from the Taliban that terrorists can never again operate from Afghan soil.
This effort only became real for the United States when the Taliban signaled interest in pursuing peace and ending their relationship with al-Qaeda and other foreign terrorist groups.
And I'd like to congratulate all of those incredible people that have worked for so long on our endless war in Afghanistan, 19 years. The other side's tired of war. Everybody's tired of war. That's been a particularly long and gruesome one. I want to remember all of the people, all of the great, great men and women that have lost their lives in the war, and to their parents and wives and husbands and families, brothers and sisters. It's a great, great people. Many lives over such a long period of time have been lost. I want to thank our wounded warriors, people that are still bearing pain and all of the problems that they've had to go through.
In light of these tremendous sacrifices, and with great humility and gratitude to those who came before us, I am formally announcing that we will implement President Trump's orders to continue our repositioning of forces from those two countries. By January 15th, 2001, I clearly am thinking of where this started in 2001. By January 15th, 2021, as a veteran whose life and family was irrevocably changed in the deserts, mountains, and cities of Iraq and Afghanistan, along with the hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops who have fought there and were forever transformed by their experiences, I celebrate this day.
It's time, after all these years, to go and to bring our people back home. We've been trying to get this for many years.
Since my administration began the negotiations on the peace deal last year, not a single American service member has been killed in combat in Afghanistan. It's over 18 months now, 18 months. And you know why that is? When I spoke to Abdul, I said, Abdul, if you kill any American soldier or any American, you keep fighting your civil war, you've been fighting it forever. You kill any American, you kill any American soldier, we're going to hit you harder than any country has ever been hit. And I said it, and I said it clear, I said it loud, and he understood that. He said, I understand. He said some other things too, by the way. He said, they're tough. He said, I understand. And from that day on, we didn't have one soldier killed. And we could have taken 2-3 years to get out, or we could have been out in 1 month. Nobody would have been killed, and we would have had 100% of our equipment. If anyone ever double-crossed the United States of America, it would be the last thing they ever did. We said it loud and clear. We reached a landmark breakthrough with 2 peace deals in the Middle East after decades of no progress. Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain all signed a historic peace agreement in the White House, with many other Middle Eastern countries to come.
Mr. President, I think historians will look back on these 2 peace agreements as the beginning of the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And you talked about the journey to get here. And I remember I heard you pledge when you were in Riyadh and when you were in Israel. You pledged that you would strengthen America's friendships and to build new partnerships in the pursuit of peace. And you kept that promise, and we see that very clearly today. Rather than appeasing America's adversaries in the region, you recruited America's allies.
The nations of the Middle East will have to decide what kind of future they want for themselves, for their country, and frankly, for their families and for their children. It's a choice between 2 futures, and it is a choice America cannot make for you. A better future is only possible if your nations drive out the terrorists and drive out the extremists.
And you focused on shared interests and shared threats, but you also asked them to shoulder their part of the burden and to fulfill their end of the obligation.
We are not here to lecture. We are not here to tell other people how to live. Instead, we are here to offer partnership based on shared interests and values. Young Muslim boys and girls should be able to grow up free from fear, safe from violence, and innocent of hatred. This is not a battle between different faiths, different sects, or different civilizations. This is a battle between barbaric criminals who seek to obliterate human life and decent people, all in the name of religion.
Nations rallied behind it. And as a consequence, the foundation has now been laid for great things in the coming years.
Donald Trump is a phenomenon that foreign countries haven't seen. So it is a shocking experience to them that he came into office.
They are not sure how seriously to take some of his pronouncements, but they're rattled by him.
When you rattle someone, that's good, because many of the world, as you know, many of the countries in our world, a beautiful world, have been absolutely abusing us and taking advantage of us. So if they're rattled in a friendly way, we're going to have great relationships with these countries. But if they're rattled in a friendly way, that's a good thing, John, not a bad thing.
Every country now has 2 things to consider. That here is a new president who's asking a lot of unfamiliar questions. And because of the combination of the partial vacuum and the new questions, one could imagine that something remarkable and new emerges out of it.
For decades, the same tired voices proposed the same failed solutions, pursuing global ambitions at the expense of their own people. But only when you take care of your own citizens will you find a true basis for cooperation. As president, I have rejected the failed approaches of the past.
I won't use some of the people that are sort of your standards, just use them. Very easy to use them. But I won't use them because they've made such bad decisions.
I have to look for talented experts with approaches and practical ideas, rather than surrounding myself with those who have perfect resumes but very little to brag about, except responsibility for a long history of failed policies and continued losses at war.
Bureaucrats, the professional bureaucrats, they didn't like Donald Trump. When we walked into the White House, they looked at us like an invading alien army.
60 GOP national security experts signed a scathing open letter opposing Trump.
We have to look to new people because many of the old people, frankly, don't know what they're doing.
From a foreign policy perspective, the former officials write, Donald Trump is not qualified to be president and commander-in-chief.
Well, they had a lot of bad thinking, a lot of bad concepts, a lot of things that I never thought were going to work. These were the ones that we were relying on to make the deals, and they wasted 35 years. They wasted many, many years. And they're the ones that have been critical of us, and look what's happening. Now they're all of a sudden saying, I think they made a mistake. They're all saying that about themselves. And under the old concepts of national defense or whatever category you want to put it under, that wasn't working and it was never going to work. And we changed things around very drastically, and then we started to negotiate. And the good news, and I look at David because you know it, you see it, you hear it. The good news is we have many other countries now in the Middle East that want to be in this, and that means peace, because they're tired of fighting. They can fight, and they're all great fighters, and they're warriors. But even great warriors get tired of fighting, and they're tired of fighting. And I can see things positively happening with Iran ultimately. I think that can all work out very well, and I think that so many great things are going to happen. And then we can also discuss the Palestinians. I think the Palestinians are going to end up doing something that's going to be very smart for them. And all their friends are coming into this, and they want to come into it. They want to come into it very badly, and I can see a lot of good things happening with respect to the Palestinians, which would be really wonderful, whether you were on their side or not on their side. People want to see it all brought to an end, and brought to an end quickly. So we weren't going by the old standards and norms. We were going by standards that can get things done, but not only get them done in a much better way. And this is just the beginning. A lot of things are happening, and they're happening very quickly. People want to be involved, and they want to be involved. For the first time, I think some of you have told me the first time ever that you've ever seen anything like this.
These groundbreaking peace deals are the dawn of the new Middle East. By taking a different approach, we have achieved different outcomes, far superior outcomes. We intend to deliver more peace agreements shortly, and I have never been more optimistic for the future of the region. There is no blood in the sand. Those days are hopefully over. As we speak, the United States is also working to end the war in Afghanistan, and we are bringing our troops home. America is fulfilling our destiny as peacemaker, but it is peace through strength. We are stronger now than ever before.
Our president is a very determined man who understands exactly what he wants. He spelled it out in The Art of the Deal and in another book, Get Tough.
He understood the importance of creating peace all over the world. What this means for America, we're no longer going to be in conflict in the Middle East. Trump has initiated one of the most important peace treaties in our history.
We stood up to decades of China's trade abuses.
6 million jobs at least gone. And now they're starting to come back.
Trump to slap China with $50 billion in tariffs over intellectual property theft. Unbelievable.
China striking at the heart of our economy. Iconic American companies like Ford and Google, the Pentagon too. And they're stealing corporate secrets worth thousands of jobs and billions of dollars.
But those days are over.
We will no longer tolerate such abuse. So we're at $250 billion now at 25% interest, and a lot of money is coming into our coffers. In fact, steel is like the hottest industry there is. If you look at what happened with steel, we're charging a 25% tariff for the dumpers. They dump massive amounts of steel. They want to put the steel companies out of business. Its vital components mean everything from military aircraft and armored vehicles to our naval ships at sea. We cannot afford in these dangerous times to become dependent on foreign nations.
This is a war being fought by other means.
With China, as you know, we put out an announcement today. They would like to see me lose an election because they've never been challenged like this. They'd rather deal with a sleepy Joe Biden. They'd probably be better off maybe waiting. But they also know that when I win, the deal gets even tougher. It gets even tougher. And they expect that I'm going to win. Otherwise, they wouldn't sign the deal. It's very simple. Next. So we just made what I guess is one of the biggest deals that's been made in a long time. You know, there was a lot of friction between the United States and China. And now it's a love fest.
For 30 years, China has grown and accelerated and came to really a huge superpower, a superpower that can confront us at any given moment in time.
Not only a trade issue, it provides peace and prosperity and development for the whole world. I think it's very, very important.
He said peace and prosperity for the whole world. So it's beyond a trade deal. It really is. And, you know, talk was getting tough. Rhetoric was getting tough. We have ships and they have ships, and we have planes and they have planes. And, you know, bad things can happen. Stupid things can happen. But this is a great thing that's taken place.
History in the making as President Donald Trump and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He today signed what is a monumental opportunity.
Our negotiations were tough, honest, open, and respectful, leading us to this really incredible breakthrough. Most people thought this could never happen. Should have happened 25 years ago, by the way, but that's okay.
Why would I call China a currency manipulator when they are working with us on the North Korean problem? We will see what happens. Why does China's currency policy have anything to do with North Korea? Should it have anything to do with North Korea?
It may be part of the overall relationship, but China is the key. China is the key. They can stop this if they want to because of their control over the North Korean economy.
He's firing a shot across the bow of China.
What is significant is that, number one, North Korea and South Korea have just aligned themselves. It's unbelievable. In 30 years, we've never had this kind of relationship. That is a major, major geopolitical advancement of the degree that none of us in 5 different administrations would have ever imagined. And it was Trump who did it.
Nearly 70 years ago, think of that, 70 years ago, an extremely bloody conflict ravaged the Korean Peninsula. Countless people died in the conflict, including tens of thousands of brave Americans. Yet while the armistice was agreed to, the war never ended. To this day, never ended.
The Wall Street Journal says the Obama team viewed North Korea as Trump's top national security priority and warned the Trump transition team about the threat.
Once the president-elect got the detailed briefings on the state of North Korean nuclear and missile programs, I imagine it was new information and rather jarring.
Remember when I came in, Obama said the worst problem we have is North Korea, Kim Jong-un. I said, what's the problem? He said, I think you're going to go to war with North Korea. I said, have you ever called him? No. I said, it would be good to talk to him, wouldn't you? You know, rather than nuclear war. Wouldn't it be nice? Anyway, through a series of events, I did talk to him, and it was nasty at the beginning, remember? He said, we have a red button on my desk, and I said, I have a much bigger red button. And my red button works, and yours doesn't.
President Trump this evening responding to the nuclear threat from North Korea in a way that the world has frankly never before heard from an American president.
This is Donald Trump. He is unconventional. He is a different kind of guy. He has the Chinese as well as the North Koreans so confused about who he is, what he is, how far he can be pushed.
If a man walks up to you on a street in Washington, because this doesn't happen, of course, in New York, but if a man walks up and puts a gun to your head and says, give me your money, wouldn't you rather know where he's coming from before he had the gun in his hand? And these people, in 3 or 4 years, are going to be having nuclear weapons. They're going to have those weapons pointed all over the world, and specifically at the United States. And wouldn't you be better off solving this really potentially unbelievable, and the biggest problem, I mean, we can talk about the economy, we can talk about Social Security. The biggest problem this world has is nuclear proliferation. And we have a country out there in North Korea, which is sort of wacko, which is not a bunch of dummies, and they are going out and they are developing nuclear weapons. And they're not doing it because they're having fun doing it, they're doing it for a reason. And wouldn't it be good to sit down and really negotiate something, and ideally negotiate? Now, if that negotiation doesn't work, you better solve the problem now than solve it later, Tim. And you know it, and every politician knows it, and nobody wants to talk about it. Jimmy Carter, who I really like, and he went over there, it was so soft. These people are laughing at us. Do you know that this country went out and gave them nuclear reactors, free fuel for 10 years? We virtually tried to bribe them into stopping, and they're continuing to do what they're doing, and they're laughing at us. They think we're a bunch of dummies.
No one in presidential history has ever played with fire more publicly and recklessly than Donald Trump. Tonight, the president is threatening nuclear war.
You want to do it in 5 years when they have warheads all over the place, every one of them pointing to New York City, to Washington, and every one of our... Is that when you want to do it, or do you want to do something now? You better do it now. And if they think you're serious, I deal with lots of people. If they think you're serious, they'll negotiate, and it'll never come to that.
Clearly, the most dangerous person who has ever occupied the White House.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury and, frankly, power, the likes of which this world has never seen before. Thank you.
It's the first and only president who casually issues threats of nuclear war.
Today, I had the privilege of meeting President Trump on my recent visit to Pyongyang, North Korea. I'd like to thank President Trump, the Vice President, and his wonderful national security team. I explained to President Trump that his leadership and his maximum pressure policy, together with international solidarity, brought us to this juncture. I told President Trump that in our meeting, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said he is committed to denuclearization. Kim pledged that North Korea will refrain from any further nuclear or missile tests. He understands that the routine joint military exercises between the Republic of Korea and the United States must continue. And he expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible. President Trump appreciated the briefing and said he would meet Kim Jong-un by May to achieve permanent denuclearization.
All right, that was a stunning statement. Let's just start with the most stunning part. That was the National Security Advisor for South Korea, Jong Ho-yong. Kim Jong-un expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible. That is an incredible thing, and I don't think there's anybody watching this or any expert on Korea who expected that response at this time. Pretty stunning. Also, you heard from the National Security Advisor of South Korea a lot of flattery from South Korea to the President of the United States, and saying that Kim Jong-un reiterating his position that North Korea would refrain from any more nuclear tests.
He respects President Trump, and he's ready to sit down at the table and try to make a deal.
I mean, I'm blown away here. I've got to tell you, I just took my tie and put it back down in front because, frankly, totally unprecedented.
Bush failed. Clinton failed. Obama failed.
Is this actually a great endorsement and a victory for President Trump?
The sanctions are biting. Certainly, he's a little bit concerned by the military uncertainty, but so too are our allies in South Korea. President Trump has rattled them. So when we talk about what's bringing this about and the timing behind it, it has almost as much to do with the tensions and the feelings and the fear south of that DMZ as it does with the uncertainty to the north.
But is all of that, Admiral, about Donald Trump?
Yeah, so
he's the guy who's created. I mean, is this a different moment on every single level than it was with Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, right? President after president who failed. Is this different, and is it different because of one person, Donald Trump?
It certainly does feel like a different moment to me. I don't think you can look at tonight's developments and not say that it is.
This should have been done by other presidents, and they decided they didn't do it. They couldn't have done it. But it would have been a lot easier if it were done 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. A lot easier than now.
Contrary to what most people think, you do not say and state peace overtures in order to make peace. That is antiquated, it's wrong, it's fallacious. One of the things that you learn in the strategy of war, you learn it from Bismarck, you learn it from Nixon, you learn it from Eisenhower and others, is that you come from the extreme right, or you create a lot of distortion and clatter and noise in order to come to the center and make peace overtures. And that is something that most people do not understand historically. Now, North Korea and South Korea are not only ice skating together, they're involved in the Winter Olympics, but they're going to be talking about peace conference.
President Trump can truly solve this problem. That would be going down as a great president. And there's no way around that. That is the reality here.
I believe he has the possibility of going down in history as a very considerable president.
Breaking news right now, President Trump tweeting moments ago that 3 detained Americans have been released from North Korea. They are now on their way home. And President Trump says he will meet them when they arrive in the U.S. at about 2 a.m. Eastern time.
This is what we would call at the State Department a CBM, a confidence building measure, obviously baked into the plan to agree to have Trump sit down with Kim Jong-un. So you saw that Kim didn't react to the exercises. Kim hasn't done any launches, and now Kim has released these 3 Americans, all part of an orchestrated framework to get to the summit. So obviously good news and certainly indicative of the fact that Kim Jong-un has taken this summit seriously, that the North Koreans really are serious about wanting to sit down.
The Trump administration deserves kudos for this, just like with Otto Warmbier. I mean, they got people home that were not able, that was not able to be done by the Obama administration.
All of a sudden, it became a love fest. It became great, right? And I went to North Korea, went to South Korea, went across the line. We got along great. There was no nuclear catastrophe, but you got to be careful.
This should have been handled, by the way, over the last 30 years, not now. That's when it should have been handled. We shouldn't have handled it. This should have been handled, and everybody will say it, too. But that's okay, because that's what we do. We handle things.
Here comes the President of the United States, and here are the 2 gentlemen. Let's watch the moment.
What's your view of the historic significance that we've seen thus far?
I think Trump's done an extraordinary amount of lifting to get to this point. The threats of preemptive military strikes, the willingness to tie cooperation with the U.S. on tightening sanctions against North Korea in return for having a more constructive economic relationship with the Chinese. That did lead the Chinese to take the North Korea issue much more seriously with the United States, and it brought the North Koreans to the table. Wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Trump. Didn't happen under Bush, didn't happen under Obama, didn't happen under Clinton. That's a big deal.
Today, we had a historic meeting and decided to leave the past behind. The world will see a major change. I would like to express my gratitude to President Trump to make this meeting happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone can make war, but only the most courageous can make peace. It is now taking place. It's a very great day. It's a very great moment in the history of the world.
This was very much a part of his emotional and intelligent fiber. Let me tell you what I mean. Number one, in 1980, he was interviewed by Rona Barrett, and she asked him, what do you feel about this Iran hostage siege? He said, this is shameful. The United States is the most powerful country in the world, and I would never allow it to happen. Now, I, Dr. Pieczenik, had been involved in that and tried to prevent the Iran hostage siege. The reality was that Trump at that time knew very well that America had to be very powerful and strong.
President Trump was the first to arrive, walking slowly toward North Korea in the no man's land of the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Then Kim Jong-un emerged, walking faster to catch up. The two leaders shook hands. Trump on South Korean soil, Kim Jong-un in the north.
Good to see you again. I've never expected to meet you at this place. Do you feel, Excellency, take a step forward? You will be the first U.S. president to cross the border.
They were separated only by a narrow concrete strip, the demarcation line between the two Koreas. President Trump asked and was invited to cross, the first sitting American president to set foot on North Korean soil. The North Korean leader, President Trump, and his advisors and family members went in for extended talks. What was supposed to be 5 minutes lasted over an hour.
What makes it unusual is that unlike most of our presidents, particularly Bush Sr., who really did very little, Reagan didn't even get involved in the takedown of the Soviet Union. I did with a bunch of other individuals in the intelligence community. So what I'm saying is that boldness is not attributed to all presidents. It's only certain ones.
We will no longer accept politicians who are all talk and no action, constantly complaining, but never doing anything about it.
Though Trump appears erratic, he is not. He's exceedingly calculating in his decisions and his strategy. He decides that he wants to accomplish a legacy that no other president in the history of America's had. That's why he chose North Korea. He had the Cuban Missile Crisis event for him. That's why he chose the takedown of Iran, because he was ashamed that Jimmy Carter had really messed up in the Iran hostage siege. He said that would never occur again.
You had the decline of GDP per capita growth in the United States from 4.5% under Reagan, 3.9% under Clinton, 2% under George W. Bush, 1% under Obama. The country was a pressure cooker. Poverty went up, violence rose, discontent rose, but our great national media in the United States didn't notice it. And Trump said it is all rotten. We've got to clean it all up. Wall Street, Hollywood, the national media, the lobbyists, campaign financing, all factions of both parties, they're all useless. We've got to get rid of them. And he's doing it, and it's a war.
We are going to drain the swamp. Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt. Now, when I say corrupt, I'm talking about totally corrupt political establishment.
I mean, it's been catastrophic.
We've been in the Middle East for 15 years, and we haven't won anything. We've spent $5 trillion in the Middle East because of thinking like that. They lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none.
The military began to understand that when they were in Iraq, they were being used, and there was really no purpose to go in there. It was clear to us that the only one who could break the paradigm or break the kind of the paradigm of the past was a man who had been independent of wealth, independent of personality, and who had a very unusual temperament, who could really rile up the system. And there was Donald Trump.
We will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy. America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism. Around the world, responsible nations must defend against threats to sovereignty, not just from global governments, but also from other new forms of coercion and domination.
That's not what Donald Trump is all about.
No. I was asked the other day about whether or not I really thought the American people had the stomach to stand up and stop this nonsense, this direction from a group of elites in absolute contravention of our law, of our Constitution.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country.
And the American people did not vote for him because he had an R next to his name. He ran against both parties, against the political system at large, a system he argued was fundamentally broken, an argument that the voters subscribed to in massive numbers. They rejected the political class of all stripes.
The fact is, we don't care about the donors and the special interests. We only care about you and your family and really making America great again. That's what we care about. That's why we're here. From the day I took the oath of office, I've been fighting to drain the swamp. And sometimes it may not look like it, but believe me, we are draining the swamp. And there are a lot of unhappy people. You can see that every day. All you have to do is turn on the news. Every time you see me hit, you know that I'm draining the swamp. And people don't like it.
We're in the midst of a revolution where Trump is the spear.
Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt. Now, when I say corrupt, I'm talking about totally corrupt political establishment.
Eisenhower warned America of the CIA, beware of the military-industrial complex.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizen can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
I mean, you know, the military-industrial complex, take a look at Dwight Eisenhower. He had it figured right many years ago. It's got tremendous power. They like fighting. They make a lot of money when they fight. All of these politicians are controlled by lobbyists and donors, etc.
You know, the nice thing is they can't come to me and say, well, we gave you money.
And when a politician does not want money from the rich, he's freer than the others to really do good for the masses of the people.
I've given up billions of dollars to serve as your president, and it's my greatest honor of a lifetime. It's so true. I cannot sit idly by and watch career politicians like Joe Biden continue bleeding this country dry. And that's what it is. Take a look at the people that are funding his campaign. People assume that they'd be funding my campaign. I don't want them. We don't want them. We never needed them. We don't want them. If I don't sound like a typical Washington politician, it's because I'm not a politician, thank God. And if I don't always play by the rules of Washington and Washington establishment, it's because I was elected to fight for you harder than ever. And I tell you what, I fight for you harder than any president has ever fought for anyone. It's not easy. That's just so you understand. You know what that is? That's Jeb's special interest and lobbyists talking.
The special interests want to control their candidates, and I can't be controlled. I'm going to do what's good for the people and for what's good for the country. They cannot stand that they do not own me. I don't need them. I don't need anything about them. I don't need their money. They cannot steer me. They cannot shake me, and they will never, ever control me. We have companies, and you've been reading about it since you're little children. We are buying equipment that we don't even want because the company that's selling the equipment is politically more adept. They're great for the politician. They're great for the company. It's a bad deal for the country.
Joe Biden is also owned by the radical globalists, the wealthy donors, the big money special interests who shipped away your jobs, shut down your factories. They live behind gated walls and they flooded your communities with illegal immigration, deadly drugs, MS-13 savages that assault, rape, and murder innocent Americans. They forced our fellow citizens to live in crumbling inner cities while they spend trillions of dollars on never-ending foreign wars. They just never ended. 19 years, they're all coming back home. You know that, right? They're all coming back home, our great warriors, our great soldiers.
And Mike Flynn said it exactly correctly. He said all of our generals, the 3, 4 stars and others who retired, received their incredible pensions, and at the same time they're on the board of directors because they don't want anything to change.
Donald Trump taking on defense contractors, hitting Boeing over the $1 billion price tag for the new Air Force One, and Lockheed Martin for the high cost of its F-35 fighter jets. Mr. Trump tweeting, The F-35 program and cost is out of control.
But ordering planes that we don't want. We're ordering all sorts of stuff that we don't want. The stuff that we do want, we're not getting. It's going to end. It's going to end. It's going to end 100%.
I don't need a $4.2 billion airplane to fly around in, okay? I don't need that. And especially when it's totally out of control because, you know, they've lost control of it. And I let them know that I don't want this. I just see things that's so incredible. You look at the F-35 program with the money, the hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's out of control. And the people that are making these deals for the government, they should never be allowed to go to work for these companies. You know, they make a deal like that, and then a year later or 2 years later or 3 years later, you see them working for these big companies that made the deal.
They have a revolving door between the federal government and the private sector. And the amount of money is staggering. According to Bruner in his new report, top bureaucratic sycophants leveraging their government experience and, security clearances mean money, apparently to garner huge payouts from large corporations. For example, Mr. Integrity himself, Jim Comey, his net worth skyrocketed by more than 4,000% after he left the DOJ in 2005. In 1 year alone, 2009, he made $6.1 million for his work with the contractor Lockheed Martin. That's 1 year. He worked 4 other years. We don't know how much he made those years. Those numbers have never been revealed, interestingly enough. And Mr. Integrity Comey, I don't remember him ever telling us this. And this came shortly, by the way, after the FBI, then under Comey, best friend forever, BFF Robert Mueller, granted a huge $1 billion, boondoggle project to Lockheed Martin that some, see for what it is. And after Comey took the reins of the FBI in 2013, Robert Mueller cashed in big time himself. He started a consulting firm where he made millions of dollars representing clients he had previously doled out contracts to as the FBI director. And according to this book, 2 of Mueller's former clients were Facebook and Apple. Guess what? They're cooperating with the special counsel investigation. Oh, can you say conflict of interest?
I'm going to put a very, lobbyists I'm doing. This is bigger than the lobbyists.
We'll also stop the lobbyists and the big defense contractors from going in and pushing our senior military and national security officials toward conflict only to reward them when they retire with lucrative jobs. It's one of the reasons the military, I'm not saying the military is in love with me, the soldiers are. The top people in the Pentagon probably aren't because they want to do nothing but fight wars so that all of those wonderful companies that make the bombs and make the planes and make everything else stay happy.
And what has happened is we have a bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. that has gotten so bloated, so out of control.
When people order from these massive companies, these massive deals, I don't want the people that are making these horrible deals, the overruns, the cost overruns, I don't want them going to work for the companies after the deals are made. They should have a lifetime restriction.
It's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia, where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. So we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting all of these countries. And then numerous of the countries go out and make a pipeline deal with Russia where they're paying billions of dollars into the coffers of Russia. So we're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia, and I think that's very inappropriate. And the former chancellor of Germany is the head of the pipeline company that's supplying the gas. Ultimately, Germany will have almost 70% of their country controlled by Russia with natural gas. So you tell me, is that appropriate? I mean, I've been complaining about this from the time I got in. It should have never been allowed to have happened. I don't care about politics, but I do care about corruption.
In 2014, at the very same time, Vice President Biden was leading the Obama administration's policy in Ukraine. Well, his son Hunter, he took a lucrative position on the board of a major Ukrainian gas company.
Anything having to do with corruption, I actually feel I have an obligation.
George Soros and John McCain and Hillary Clinton and John Kerry and the normal, usual suspects that funded al-Qaeda, funded ISIS, went and met with the groups, destabilized the Middle East, Africa, blew up Libya, blew up Egypt, a huge civil war, hundreds of thousands dead.
We are going to drain the swamp. We have begun to drain the swamp of government corruption by imposing a 5-year ban on lobbying by executive branch officials and a lifetime ban. Thank you. Thank you. And a lifetime ban on becoming lobbyists for a foreign government.
We had a civil coup that was initiated by Hillary and her cohorts based on corruption.
Our political system has failed the people and works only to enrich itself. I want to reform that system so that it works for you.
However, in order to stop this coup,
We want transparency. What I want is I want total transparency.
The Saudis and the Qataris are giving all this money to the Clinton Foundation while Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State and the State Department is approving massive arms sales.
And now they're in total panic mode because of all the crimes they've committed.
It is our corrupt political establishment that is the greatest power behind the efforts at radical globalization and the disenfranchisement of working people. Their financial resources are virtually unlimited. Their political resources are unlimited. Their media resources are unmatched. And most importantly, the depths of their immorality is absolutely unlimited.
We thought after the election it would stop, but it didn't stop. It just started. And tremendous corruption. Tremendous corruption. So we had a campaign. Little did we know we were running against some very, very bad and evil people with fake dossiers, with all of these horrible, dirty cops that took these dossiers and did bad things. They knew all about it.
I have a lot of enemies out there. This may be the last time you'll see me for a while. A lot of very, very rich enemies, but they are not happy with what I'm doing. But I figure we have one chance to do it, and no other president's going to do what I do.
They wanted to inflict political pain on somebody that had just won an election that to a lot of people was surprised.
But this is what the end result is.